The Commonwealth had a way of teaching people not to keep anything soft. It taught that lesson with radiation, with hunger, with raiders, with the ugly arithmetic of survival. Love something, and sooner or later the Wasteland noticed. Build something peaceful, and sooner or later someone hungry, cruel, or bored came looking for it. Most people learn to live light, no attachments, no promises, no illusions. John Wick had learned that lesson before the bombs ever fell. That was why the cabin existed. It sat in the pines west of Lexington, hidden beyond a broken service road and a rise of rock that turned engines useless and footsteps loud. It was a small place, built from scavenged lumber, patched metal, and patience. The roof was ugly but watertight. The windows were narrow and reinforced. A pot-bellied stove held the center of the room. Rain barrels stood outside beneath the eaves. A woodpile leaned under a tarp beside the porch. It was not much. That was the point. John had not come to the Commonwealth to build a legend. He had not come to save settlers, fight factions, or become part of whatever passed for civilization in a dead world, trying to imitate the old one. He had come because quiet was difficult to find and easier to defend alone. In the cabin, quiet came in routines: water at dawn, firewood at dusk, weapons cleaned every night whether they had been fired or not, food stored in exact places, escape routes checked weekly, perimeter walked twice daily. He had built the place with his own hands and trusted it because he had measured every board, every blind angle, every line of sight from the ridge. There were no surprises in the cabin, at least not until the dog. The first time he saw it, it looked like something the Wasteland had already tried to erase. Lean brown fur, patchy in places, one torn ear, scar tissue around the left foreleg from an old trap wound. Eyes too alert to be tame, too tired to be wild. It stood under the broken overhang of a red rocket station south of Concord, watching him with the hard caution of a creature that had survived long enough to stop expecting kindness. John had found it while searching the station for fuel line tubing and sealed medical gauze. He heard the growl before he saw the animal. He turned slowly. The dog did not back away. Neither did he. After a moment, John crouched, opened a can of cram, and set it on the concrete floor between them. Then he stepped back. The dog waited. So did he. Finally, the animal limped forward and ate without taking its eyes off him. John finished his salvage run and headed back toward the woods. He did not look behind him. The dog followed him for half a mile. The next morning, it was asleep on his porch. John opened the door, looked down, and for one dangerous second remembered another dog in another life. A beagle stepping carefully across polished floors. A card in Helen's handwriting. A final gift from a woman who had understood that grief left alone would hollow him out completely. He closed the memory before it could fully form. The Wasteland dog raised its head, looked at him, and thumped its tail once against the porch boards. John sighed. "You can stay." The dog stayed. He never named it. Not because he did not care. Because names made the world bolder. Still, some things happened even without names. He fed it, patched up its paws when it cut them on rusted metal, shared the warm side of the stove during winter storms, let it sleep by the bed on bad nights when the wind was too loud or the woods too quiet. The animal learned the perimeter faster than most men learned simple instructions. It could hear wrongness in the trees before John could see it. It knew the difference between a rad stag moving through brush and a man trying to move carefully. It knew where the cabin ended and danger began. For months it was enough. Not happiness, not peace in the old world sense. Just enough. The dog was there when he split wood in the morning. There when he cleaned the 10mm at the table. There when the lantern burned low and the Commonwealth for a few rare hours, felt as though it might keep its distance. John never said it aloud, but some part of him understood what the dog had become. Not a replacement, not redemption, not a cure for the past. Just the last quiet thing in a world that tried to devour quiet first. That was why the night it ran into the woods felt wrong immediately. The storm had come in hard from the coast. Rain hammered the roof in long, steady sheets. The pines bent and hissed. Water ran in silver lines down the porch steps. Inside, the stove glowed orange. John sat at the table under lantern light, stripping and cleaning a 10mm pistol with slow, practiced precision. The dog had been restless all evening, pacing, stopping at the door, ears up, listening. John noticed because he always noticed. At first he thought maybe wild mongrels or a rad stag moving too close to the property line. But the dog was not growling. It was uneasy in a different way, agitated, pulled by something. At last it scratched sharply at the back door. John looked up. "What is it?" The dog scratched again, then whined. John stood, crossed the room, and eased the back door open a few inches. Rain and blackness beyond the threshold. The dog shot through the gap before he could stop it. "Hey!" Too late. It disappeared into the trees behind the cabin. John stepped out under the eaves and listened. Nothing at first. Then, far off through the storm, came the sound of laughter. Human laughter. Then a gunshot. Then another voice, shouting, "There! There it goes!" Another shot cracked through the woods. The laughter came again. Looser now. Crueler. John went still in a way that was almost unnatural, as if his body had stopped being flesh and become an instrument set to a single purpose. He listened again and caught more fragments under the rain. "Run, you ugly thing. Push it uphill. Maybe somebody owns it." More laughter. Not hunting for food. Not survival. Sport. For one sharp second the storm vanished, and another memory tore through him. Helen's letter. Daisy's paws on hardwood. The impossible softness of being given something innocent after a life built on death. He blinked once, and the cabin returned. Then something slammed into the porch steps. The dog. It half fell, half crawled through the doorway and collapsed across the floorboards in a tangle of mud, blood, and panic. One hind leg dragged wrong. Fur along its side was dark with rain and blood. There was a puncture near the shoulder, a long scraped groove along the ribs, and fresh bruising under the wet coat where someone had kicked or struck it hard. John was on his knees instantly. The dog tried to get up. Couldn't. He slid one hand under its neck, the other along its chest, feeling the frantic hammer of its heart. Easy. The word came low and level, but something behind it had gone very cold. The dog looked up at him with wet, shaking eyes. And that was the moment the memory landed fully. Helen in soft hospital light. Her face thin but warm. The way she had looked at him when she knew she was dying and he did not know how to survive that. The crate. The beagle. The card. "This is the last thing I can give you. A chance to grieve with something to love." John had failed that gift once by letting the world touch it. Now the world had found the shape of that wound again. Outside, voices came closer through the rain. "I told you it ran this way. Cabin's got a light. Hope the owner likes games." Laughter again. John laid the dog carefully onto the blanket by the stove and moved with perfect calm. Medical kit from the shelf. Bandages. Alcohol. Needle and thread. Leather strip. The dog whimpered as he examined the wounds. "No," John said quietly. "Stay." He cleaned the puncture first, deep, but not fatal. The leg was twisted, maybe fractured. The scrape along the ribs had likely been a grazing round. Deliberate injury, deliberate suffering. The men outside had not been trying to kill it quickly. They had been chasing it for fun. Then came the pounding on the front porch. "Hey, cabin!" Another voice, louder now. "You got a mutt in there? We're not done with it." The dog bared its teeth weakly from the floor. John finished knotting the first bandage. Then he stood. He picked up the 10mm, checked the chamber, took the combat rifle from the pegs, moved to the door. There were 5 of them outside. He knew that before he opened it, by spacing in the voices, by the uneven pressure of boots in mud, by the way one idiot talked too much because 4 others were nearby. John unlatched the door and opened it. The lead raider was grinning when he turned toward the light, pipe pistol in one hand, patchwork armor, red cloth tied around the bicep, young enough to think invincibility was a personality trait. He got one good look at John Wick standing in the doorway and had just enough time to start understanding his mistake. The rifle fired once. The round hit center chest and threw him backward off the porch. Before the others could react, John put a second round through the throat of the man on the left. The third tried to raise a shotgun. John shot him through the wrist, then drove the follow-up into his face. The fourth went for cover behind the woodpile and started screaming that there were more people inside. There weren't, but panic was useful. John stepped off the porch into the rain and drove toward the woodpile. The 4th raider came up with a rusted machete and got the rifle stock under his jaw instead. Teeth snapped. The machete dropped. John grabbed the man's coat, slammed him against the stacked timber, stripped the knife from his belt, and drove it under the chin into the brain. The 5th man ran. Not tactical, not disciplined, just running. John saw the red crown painted crudely on the back of the man's shoulder plate and fired once. The round took him high in the calf. He tumbled down the muddy path and landed hard against a stump, shrieking. John walked downhill through the rain. The man clawed backward, trying to drag himself farther into the trees. His boot left a thick red trail. John rolled him onto his back with one foot. The raider looked up, and the fight went out of him at once. "Please, who sent you?" The man shook his head too fast. "We were just hunting." John lowered the 10mm until the muzzle touched the ruined leg. The raider's breath hitched. All right. Who sent you?" "Rook," he gasped. "Rook sent us." John said nothing. The man swallowed rain and panic. "He's Red Crown, scout runner. Said there was a cabin out here. Said the dog runs the slope same time every night. Said if we pushed it hard enough, maybe the owner shows himself." "Why?" The raider was crying now. "He likes tests. Marlowe likes knowing what's on his roads. We didn't know who you were." John looked at him for a long, flat moment. "Now you do." The shot vanished into the thunder. When he went back inside, the dog was still alive. That mattered. He worked through the rest of the storm without speaking, cleaned the wounds, splintered the leg, stitched the graze on the ribs, forced water between clenched teeth, sat with one hand on the dog's side and counted breaths while the lantern burned low and the rain slowly began to ease. By dawn, the worst of the bleeding had stopped. The dog's eyes opened once. The tail moved weakly against the blanket. John sat back on his heels. Good. It was the only word he allowed himself. By noon, the cabin was in order again. Blood scrubbed from the floorboards, shell casings collected, the dead raiders stripped of anything useful and dragged beyond the property line. Their gear lay arranged on the table inside with exacting precision. Ammunition, maps, caps, a half-empty chem syringe, a signal whistle, and 3 strips of red cloth marked with a jagged black crown. John studied it all. These were not random drunks ranging too far from camp. Their armor was mixed, their weapons cheap, but the route notes were organized. They had marked approaches around Lexington, Cambridge, and the northern outskirts of Boston. One charcoal circle sat directly over the rough location of his cabin. Watched. For how long? He unfolded the largest map and found another note near the old freight tunnels east of the city. Rook Roots, Marlowe owns. That was the first time he saw the name. Marlowe. Not a scavered chief, not a feral raider king screaming over a bonfire, something smarter. A man using tunnel scouts, relay crews, and outer patrols to tax movement across the Commonwealth without needing walls or banners. That made him dangerous. The dog slept through the afternoon. Fever threatened, then settled. John changed the bandages twice, fed it small strips of cooked meat, and kept one eye on the tree line, while the other stayed on the slow rise and fall of its chest. Near dusk, footsteps came up the path. Measured. Not raider. Not trying to hide. John moved to the door and opened it before the knock landed. A man stood on the porch in a worn trench coat and fedora, hands visible and posture relaxed in the deliberate way of someone who expected trouble and had made peace with that. His face gave him away immediately if one knew what to look for. Synthetic skin, mechanical wear around the eyes. The shape of a man built to imitate another era's detective. Nick Valentine. John had heard the name from caravan talk, a private investigator out of Diamond City, missing persons, bad debts, ugly truths. Nick looked past John into the cabin, saw the dog on the blanket by the stove, and took in the blood-stained cloth in the basin. Then he looked back up. I'm guessing I'm not interrupting supper. What do you want? Nick glanced at the slope, the scrubbed porch, the disturbed mud where bodies had lain. Woman in Bunker Hill hired me to find out why 3 caravans disappeared near Lexington this month. Trail gave me red cloth, old shell casings, and a lot of dead silence. Then I found 5 men spread through the trees in a pattern too neat to be luck. John said nothing. Nick reached into his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. Found this near an old relay shack east of here. John took it and opened it. The note was brief. Lex cabin. Watched. Dog runs west line. Owner armed. Rook says, test him. John folded the paper once. Nick watched him carefully. That turn your night from ugly into educational? Yes. Nick looked again toward the dog. Can't say I'm sorry those men had a bad evening. John stepped aside. Come in. Nick entered, removed his hat, and crouched near the blanket. He did not touch the dog, just studied the splint and the bandages. Still breathing's a good sign. It'll live. Nick straightened. Then whoever did this made a bad mistake. The 2 men looked at each other for a moment. Nick broke the silence. There's a name moving through the ugly parts of Boston. Red Crown Marlowe. Tunnel routes, extortion lines, chem traffic, hired guns. If Rook's his scout and your cabin got tested, this wasn't random. No. Thought not. Nick glanced at the maps on the table. You planning to head into the city? Yes. That'd be good neighbor first, if you're interested in surviving long enough to ask the right questions. Hancock hears things. Daisy sells things she shouldn't. And somewhere between them there's always someone drunk enough to betray a boss. John looked down at the route note again. Nick adjusted his tie. Question is whether you're going there to investigate or kill. John answered without hesitation. Both. Nick almost smiled. That tracks. He tipped his hat back on. I'll leave word with Daisy that you're coming. Why help? Nick's expression flattened slightly. Because I know what it looks like when bad men think cruelty is a language nobody answers. His eyes drifted toward the dog one last time. And because some people in this Commonwealth have gotten too comfortable believing there are no consequences anymore. Then he left. The cabin felt smaller after that, more temporary. At sunrise the next morning, John packed. Ammunition, water, knife, med supplies, spare magazines, a length of cord, 2 days of dried food, maps from the dead raiders. He rigged the cabin for noise alarms before leaving, bell line on the inner threshold, a shell trap over the rear window, water bowl beside the blanket, extra meat within reach. When he knelt beside the dog, it lifted its head and looked at him. "I'm leaving for a few days," he said. The dog's ears twitched. John rested one hand at its neck. "I'll be back." He stood, took one last look around the room, and stepped out into the Commonwealth. The road to Goodneighbor ran through the dead bones of suburbia and the outer ruins of Boston. John moved fast where he could and disappeared where he had to. He stayed off the obvious roads when they made him visible and used them only when they forced everyone else into predictable lines. Twice he found Red Crown markings sprayed low on broken walls. Once he passed a scavenger hanging from a traffic light with a sign around his neck that read "Unpaid. Marlowe's work." By late afternoon, the city thickened around him. Collapsed overpasses, brick storefronts, half-flooded alleys, smoke from cook fires and chem dens threading into a gray sky. Somewhere distant, automatic fire rattled. Somewhere else, music leaked from a speaker too damaged to remember quality. Goodneighbor announced itself in neon and generator hum. Its gate stood between stacked barricades and rusted walls painted over with layers of threat and invitation. 2 guards watched him approach, one human in patched armor and a tuxedo shirt, one ghoul with a shotgun and the expression of a man who had spent 2 centuries becoming impossible to impress. "That's far enough," the human said. John stopped. The ghoul ran his eyes over him once. Rifle, pistol, coat, face. "You look like trouble, that learned manners." "I'm looking for Daisy," John said. The guards exchanged a look. The human asked, "You from around here?" "No." "That's obvious." The ghoul shifted the shotgun. "You carrying Red Crown business?" "No." That answer changed something. The human said, "Entry fee." John reached into his pocket and produced caps. The guard looked unimpressed. John paused, then reached deeper into the inner coat and withdrew a gold coin. It was enough. The ghoul stared. The human straightened. For one beat, the city beyond the gate seemed to mute itself. "Where'd you get that?" the human asked. John closed his hand over the coin again. "I said I'm looking for Daisy." The ghoul slowly stepped aside. "Yeah," he muttered. "You do that." Goodneighbor watched him the moment he entered. The place always did. Drunks, triggermen, caravan runners, chem dealers, scavvers, mercs. Every street had eyes. Every doorway held someone measuring everyone else's value. John walked through it with a stillness that made people move without fully understanding why. Near the central square, a thin man in a dirty fur-collared coat slid into his path with the confidence of someone protected by local custom. "New face tax," the man said. John kept walking. The man matched him. "Simple arrangement. You pay me, I make sure nobody rolls you in the next 10 minutes. John stopped. The square noticed. The man smiled wider. "See, you understand, Bussy." John took the wrist, bent it backward until the hidden sleeve knife dropped free, caught the blade, and pinned the man's coat to the wall beside his throat in one smooth motion. "No," John said. Then he walked on. No one followed. Daisy's shop sat down a lower corridor near the memory den. Inside, it looked like every good junk shop did. Impossible shelves, old-world debris, useful scrap disguised as trash, books, ammo, maps, and the feeling that every object had a story best not discussed in public. Daisy stood behind the counter in a cardigan and green visor, ledger open, ruined ghoul face unreadable until she looked up and saw him. "Well," she said, "either the wrong man found the right shop or the right man found the wrong century." John crossed to the counter. "I need information." Everybody does. Question is what kind? Red Crown Marlowe. Daisy slowly closed the ledger. That kind. He placed the folded root note on the counter. Then one strip of red crown cloth. Then the blood-stained dog chain. Daisy looked at all three. When she looked back up, there was no humor left in her expression. "Ah," she said quietly. "One of those." "Yes." She studied him for a long beat. "Marlowe runs tunnels, relay dens, chem routes, extortion lines, and enough hired killers to make ordinary revenge a poor investment. If you're here because he stole caps, let it go. If you're here because he insulted you, grow up." John's voice stayed flat. "His men hunted my dog for sport." That landed. Daisy nodded once and disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she had a rolled transit map and a bottle of amber liquid. She poured herself a glass, left the second untouched, and spread the map out. "Marlowe anchors his network under old freight lines east of here," she said. "Rook is one of his outer scouts. If your cabin got marked, then Marlowe was either expanding or measuring what lived on his edge." She tapped 3 points on the map. "Good Neighbor hears him. Bunker Hill pays him. Lexington feels him. But he doesn't own the whole city, no matter how much he wants people to believe it. Men like him survive on relay points, fear, and the assumption nobody cares enough to go underground after them. Where do I find Rook? Broker named Ledger Liz in Haymarket tracks route cuts and surface tests for half the underworld. If anyone knows where Rook's been ranging, she does." John memorized the route. Daisy watched him with sharpened interest. "You understand something, Mr. Wick. Marlowe is becoming more than a raider problem. Good Neighbor hates him, gunners resent him, settlers fear him. If you move on him hard enough, every faction in Boston starts asking who you are." John folded the map. "Let them ask." Before Daisy could answer, the bell over the door rattled. 3 men entered. Nick Valentine first. Behind him came Hancock, all colonial swagger and mayoral irritation. The third wore Brotherhood fatigues under light field plating with a laser sidearm at his hip and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. Scar along the jaw, Paladin insignia, dangerous in the disciplined way. Hancock looked around the room and sighed. "Daisy, when I told you to keep me informed, I didn't mean gather every active problem in the city inside one shop." Daisy gestured at John. Too late. The Brotherhood Paladin looked directly at John. "You're Wick." Not a question. John answered, "Who's asking?" "Paladin Mercer, Brotherhood of Steel. Your name came up in 3 separate reports before noon. That usually means a situation." Hancock crossed his arms. "Here's the short version. Marlowe's a parasite. Nobody likes him. Nobody likes him enough to spend the manpower clearing tunnels. Then you show up." Nick leaned against a shelf. "Now Boston's got a new variable." Mercer ignored him. "If you're moving on Marlowe, I want to know your objective." "Rook first," John said, "then Marlowe." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "After that?" John met his gaze. "We'll see." That answer changed the room. Hancock's expression shifted first. Nick went a little still. Even Daisy looked at him differently now, as if the scale of what might follow had just become visible. Mercer said, "My order has no interest in criminal turf disputes, but we care when unknown actors start destabilizing sectors near critical urban infrastructure." Hancock gave a short laugh. "That's Brotherhood for we noticed and don't like not controlling it." Mercer didn't glance at him. "If your actions endanger civilians or compromise Brotherhood operations, I will treat you as hostile." John's answer came calm and immediate. "Then don't get in my way." Hancock barked a laugh. "I like him." Mercer did not. Nick pushed off the shelf. "Maybe that's because everybody in this city keeps confusing force with authority. Raiders think force is terror. Gunners think force is profit. Brotherhood thinks force is order. He glanced at John. Then this man walks in with an old coin, a wounded dog, and a body count. Daisy took a sip from her glass. Poetic. Nick ignored that. Point is, people are going to talk. Hancock looked at John directly. And when they do, the politics shift. Settlers hear you hurt Red Crown, they start hoping. Raiders hear your name, they start running. Mercs start pricing you. Factions start deciding whether you're useful, dangerous, or both. John said, good. A beat passed. Then Daisy smiled the way someone smiles when history decides to become expensive. Well, she said, there it is. Mercer straightened. You think this ends with Marlowe? No, John replied. I think it starts there. That line held in the room after he said it. Because now this was no longer about one wounded dog, one scout, one raider boss in the dark. Now it sounded like a beginning. Hancock opened the door and looked back over his shoulder. Good Neighbor doesn't officially support what you're about to do. Of course not, Daisy murmured. Hancock's grin sharpened. Unofficially, if Red Crown starts bleeding, I won't rush to bandage it. Mercer left next, but not before giving John one last look that promised future conflict between private violence and institutional authority. When the room had thinned again, Nick adjusted his tie and looked at John. You realize every drunken good neighbor now has a story about you. John tucked the map into his coat. Good. Nick sighed. One day I'm going to meet a man who says that and means something healthier. John looked toward the door, toward Haymarket, toward the tunnels beyond, toward the dark places where men like Rook and Marlowe believed cruelty was power and fear was ownership. Then, just for a moment, toward the direction of the cabin, toward the dog waiting there. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only Nick and Daisy heard it. They made a mistake. Nick held his gaze a moment, then nodded once. Yeah, he said. I think they did. Outside, the Commonwealth was already doing what it always did when something dangerous entered its bloodstream. It was listening. By midnight, drunks in Good Neighbor would be talking about the stranger who pinned Finn to a wall and asked for Marlowe by name. By morning, caravan guards on the Bunker Hill Road would repeat the story with extra bodies attached. By afternoon, raiders in relay dens under Boston would hear that the cabin in Lexington had answered back. And in the tunnels, where men built little empires by convincing the world there were no consequences anymore, Red Crown Marlowe would hear a new name spoken in the same breath as his own, not as prey, as a problem. John Wick stepped out of Daisy's shop and into the neon and gunmetal glow of Good Neighbor with a map in one pocket, death in the other, and a war beginning to spread outward from one wounded dog on a cabin floor. The Commonwealth had not met him yet. Not really. But it was about to. By the time John Wick left Good Neighbor, he already belonged to the city's rumor mill. That was how Boston worked. It did not wait for facts. It built myth out of fragments and sold the rest as certainty. A stranger with a rifle and old world coin. A man asking about Red Crown Marlowe by name. A drifter who pinned Finn to a wall without drawing blood. A killer who walked like he had nowhere to be except at the end of somebody else's bad decision. Good Neighbor loved stories like that. The Commonwealth feared them. John moved through Haymarket with the map folded in his coat and the streets narrowing around him into old brick corridors and ruined market roads clogged with 2 centuries of wreckage. Night had settled hard now. Lantern lights swung under awnings. Rainwater dripped from bent signs. Somewhere a generator coughed and caught. Somewhere else, a feral ghoul screamed in the distance and was answered by a burst of gunfire that ended the discussion. Boston was alive the way a dying animal was alive, mean, twitching, and impossible to mistake for healthy. Haymarket sat in one of the city's ugliest seams. Old butcher shops, warehouse walls, dead loading bays, and alleys too narrow to trust. Daisy's directions were exact, which told John two things. First, she knew what she was talking about, and second, if he died down there, she would at least know approximately where to send somebody for the body. The butcher shop announced itself by smell before sight. Spoiled meat, old brine, chem smoke, oil. In the front window hung a half-cleaned Brahmin carcass, exactly as Hancock had described earlier through Daisy's information chain. Behind the counter stood two men in blood-streaked aprons, carrying themselves like guards pretending to be laborers. Their knives were too clean. Their eyes moved too much. John did not approach from the front. He circled the block once, using shadow and broken walls, and found what he needed on the second pass, a fire escape hanging loose from the neighboring building and a broken second-floor window above the butcher's storeroom. He climbed without hesitation, eased through the frame, and entered darkness thick with dust and dried salt. Below him, voices drifted through the warped floorboards. "Told you Liz wants all root papers tonight. Then tell Liz to carry her own damn books." A laugh. Another voice. "You hear about Good Neighbor? Some outsider asked for Marlowe in Daisy's." That stopped John cold for half a second, not because of surprise, but because of speed. The story was already moving faster than he was. What kind of outsider? Kind with guns. Everybody's got guns. Yeah, but this one's got everybody nervous. Good. John moved toward the stairwell. On the landing, he found the first man with his back turned, smoking and scratching at the side of his neck. John closed the distance without a sound, clamped one hand over the mouth, and drove the knife through the base of the skull. The body sagged at once. He lowered it gently to the floor and kept moving. The second guard heard the shift of weight too late. He turned, opened his mouth, and John shot him through it with the 10 millimeters before the first syllable formed. That was the end of stealth. Voices erupted below. "Upstairs! Get the gate! Get Liz!" John came down the stairs fast and hit the lower room while panic was still choosing directions. The butcher shop's back area opened into a hidden market disguised as storage space. Crates, lockboxes, root ledgers, chem bundles, ammunition tins, and 3 men trying to become a coherent defense. The first died with a round through the throat. The second went for a shotgun and got the table driven into his knees before John finished him with 2 shots at arm's length. The third dove behind hanging Brahmin meat and fired wild. The round shredded flesh and hooks. John advanced through the swinging carcasses, found the muzzle flash, and shot low. The man screamed and folded. John put a final round into him and listened. Below, a steel gate was being dragged closed in the sub-basement. A woman's voice, sharp and controlled, barked orders without wasting breath. "Seal the ledger room! Move!" Ledger Liz. John vaulted the butcher's table, kicked through the rear door, and found the stair down. 3 men were coming up with submachine guns and no room to use them well. He fired into the lead man's chest, shoved the body into the second, then shot the third through the gap before any of them could get more than one burst off. The stairwell filled with smoke, dust, and the smell of burning powder. He descended into the market beneath the market. This was where Marlowe's money lived. Cold storage rooms repurposed into back-channel commerce, handwritten toll lists, surface maps, caravan schedules, crates marked in codes, extortion books disguised as routing ledgers. A kingdom built not on territory, but on information. At the far end, through a half-closed cage gate, stood Ledger Liz. She was exactly the type Daisy would respect and never trust. Mid-40s, severe hair, long coat, pistol in hand, eyes already making calculations rather than apologies. Behind her, a heavy safe door stood open while she shoved books into it one after another. She saw John and fired immediately. No speech, no threats, no melodrama. Smart. The round sparked off the wall beside his head. John dropped left behind a concrete support, fired once through the cage, and took one guard in the throat. The second got around through the hand and screamed, dropping the chain he had been using to pull the gate closed. Liz kept firing, double taps, measured, retreating without turning her back. Even smarter. "You're late!" she called from behind the safe door. "Marlowe thought grief would make you faster." John stepped out just enough to put 2 rounds into the overhead bulbs. The room dropped into darkness. Someone cursed. A crate overturned. A wounded guard began whimpering somewhere near the cage. John moved through the blackness as if it had shape. In places like this, it did. Air currents around open doors, sound off concrete, panic always running louder than discipline. Liz fired toward the sound of a footstep that wasn't there. John reached her before she corrected. He caught her wrist, turned the pistol away, and slammed her against the safe hard enough to empty the air from her lungs. The gun cracked into the ceiling. Her free hand went for a blade. He stripped it, pinned her to the steel with one forearm, and brought the 10mm up under the chin. He switched on a small flashlight, taken from one of the dead guards. The beam lit her face. "Talk." Liz was breathing hard, but the fear in her eyes never became panic. "If I do, I'm dead. If you don't, you're dead now." That landed. She swallowed carefully. "Depot isn't the real trap." John said nothing. "Marlowe knows you will expect brute force there. He wants you thinking in terms of one boss, one nest, one final room. That's not how he works." Her breathing steadied by degrees as she spoke, as if information was a craft, and giving it restored control. "He's moved key people into the lower Park Street loop. Floodgates, maintenance shelves, sniper angles, relay stations. He wants you coming through the obvious route while he watches from above. Where's Rook?" Her eyes flicked once. "Below the loop, scout level, service crawl and corpse pit access. He's close whenever Marlowe expects sport." That answer came too quickly to be a lie. "What about Marlowe?" "He doesn't sleep in one place long, but if he thinks you're really coming, he'll be at Park Street. He likes seeing important kills himself." That tracked. Names. She gave them. Route captains, floodgate operator, sniper on the east maintenance shelf, relay boys, surface watchers, fallback points, tunnel branches used for flanking and disposal. John took it all in and sorted it the way he sorted weapons, by function, by danger, by what mattered first. When she finished, he stepped back half a pace. She misread that as mercy. "Take me with you." "No." "I can get you through 3 checkpoints before dawn." "No." "You need—" John drove the knife through the thick ledger under her left hand and into the safe behind it. The scream tore through the room. He left her pinned there, alive, furious, and incapable of following. Not a kindness. A message. The wounded guard by the cage stared at him in horror. John turned the flashlight beam onto the man's face. "You tell Marlowe I'm coming." The guard nodded too fast. John took the route books, Liz's key ring, spare ammunition, and 1 compact submachine gun with 2 clean magazines. Then he left the butcher shop the way he had entered it. Through the dark, through the upper level, through the city, as if the walls were only temporary agreements between men and gravity. In an alley 2 blocks away, he stopped under a dead street lamp and read the stolen ledgers. The extent of Marlowe's operation unfolded in columns and shorthand notes. Toll payments, threat lists, route protections, settlements marked as soft, armed, desperate, or uncooperative, caravans that paid, caravans that vanished, side notes about chem addiction, children, leverage points. Marlowe had not built his power by being the loudest thing in a room. He had built it by making sure every room could be priced. John tore out the pages with route maps and names. The rest he dropped into an oil drum behind a warehouse and set on fire with a match. The paper took slowly, then all at once. By morning, half of Marlowe's accounting would be smoke. Good. He moved for the utility hatch Daisy had marked on the map just before midnight. It lay beneath a collapsed truck in an alley choked with weeds and rusted crates. The brass key Daisy had provided turned with heavy resistance. When the lock gave, a deep metallic thunk echoed below. John lifted the hatch. Cold air rose from beneath, carrying rust, wet stone, mold, and the dead electrical smell of places that had gone too long without sunlight. He climbed down. The maintenance shaft ended on a narrow concrete ledge beside old conduit lines and a drainage trench running black along the wall. His flashlight cut a tunnel through the dark, broken tile, warning signs, graffiti layered over transit maps until the old world and the new one had become the same message. Claimed territory, ignored authority, private law. 30 feet in, he found the first tripwire. Simple, effective. Frag charges rigged to a pressure strip disguised under pooled water and debris. He disarmed it in seconds, salvaged 2 grenades, and left the rest visible enough to tell any later patrol that somebody had come through who understood their work. Farther on, he found the hanging corpse. Old body, stripped pockets, red cloth around the wrist, throat cut, then displayed upside down from a conduit bracket. A lesson, probably unpaid, now serving as architecture. John kept moving. At the first major split, a faint reflection flashed ahead and vanished. Mirror signal. Spotter. He killed the flashlight and flattened himself beneath a ruptured pipe assembly, just as a suppressed shot snapped through the space where his head had been. Concrete chipped behind him. Sniper on the shelf. He eased one of the salvaged grenades into the drainage channel, let it roll, then kicked it hard against the wall at the far end of the passage. Clang. The sniper fired at the sound. Wrong direction. John was already climbing the side ladder 3 supports over. He reached the maintenance shelf and found her turning back toward the false echo, long rifle coming around too late. He seized the barrel, yanked it aside, and smashed the butt of the 10mm into her mouth. Teeth broke. She clawed for a sidearm. He trapped the wrist, drove her into the wall, and pinned her there. Floodgate controls! Blood ran down her chin. South shelf, yellow rails. Rook! Below! She gasped. Where the dark gets mean! He struck the side of her neck and let her collapse unconscious beside the rifle. Not dead. Not free. Again, a message. He advanced. The lower Park Street loop opened out of darkness in stages. First the sound. Dripping water, shouted orders, the metallic clatter of men trying not to sound afraid. Then the architecture, a flooded central rail bed, maintenance shelves on both sides, catwalks crossing above, old signal rooms jutting from the walls, work lamps hung low and caged. Sandbag nests had been built into the old supports. Crates sat beneath tarps. Firing slits had been cut into stacked concrete. Floodgates could redirect the water level at key points. A fortress. Not a beautiful one. A practical one. Marlowe understood systems. That made him worth killing. John circled along the upper maintenance seam and reached the yellow-railed switch room from the rear side duct. just as the floodgate operator was swearing at a pressure wheel. Boxer Finn looked exactly like his name sounded. Huge shoulders, shaved head, scarred knuckles, and the misplaced certainty of a man who believed size was a profession. He never saw John until the wrench vanished from his hand and punched into his throat. Finn reeled backward, choking. John seized the shotgun propped against the wall, jammed it into the man's gut, and fired. The blast filled the switch room with blood and steam. John crossed to the controls and studied the surviving labels. East lower gate, drain sectors, pressure release, flood control. He opened one valve halfway. Deep beneath the loop, old metal groaned. Water began to rise. Not enough for spectacle. Enough for uncertainty. Enough to turn familiar footing into hazard and force everyone watching the floor to stop watching the dark. Voices immediately echoed from the main loop. "What's the water doing?" "Check south." "Finn!" John cut the switch room lights and left. The alarm shot rang out seconds later. Single rifle crack. Then shouts. Then motion everywhere. The loop woke all at once. John moved through it like a correction. First nest, 2 men behind sandbags trying to orient toward the east shelf. He killed the left with Finn's shotgun and the right with 2 rounds through the chest before the first body hit the floor. Second nest, a teenage lookout with a pipe rifle and too much fear to function. John saw the age, saw the trembling, and shifted his aim. He put the round through the shoulder instead of the head and kept moving. The boy's scream added to the confusion. A welded choke gate ahead opened fire through a slit. John dropped into the floodwater, slid under the line of fire, and shot through the sheet metal seam where muzzle flash leaked out. The body behind it folded heavily. He took the side passage past the corpse pit Liz had mentioned. Even in the dark, the smell was enough to define the room. Rot, stagnant water, old blood. Bodies stacked where old service lockers had once stood, some stripped, some weighted, some still wearing Red Crown cloth. Marlowe disciplined his own people as readily as others. Useful to know. Up ahead, a raised voice cut through the loop. "Find him!" John paused at the broken signal room overlooking the central rails and saw the man below the lamp. Rook. Narrow face, restless posture, scout harness over piecemeal armor, submachine gun at the sling, a flare gun in one hand. He moved like a man who had built his career on making fear look like personality. Around him, Red Crown men were scrambling from nest to nest while the water rose inch by inch around their boots. "Marlowe wants eyes!" Rook shouted. "Not excuses!" One of the men yelled back, "Sarah's down!" "Then she should have shot straighter." John steadied the stolen rifle on the edge of the signal room. No speech, no threat, no reveal. He breathed out. The shot took Rook through the mouth and blew the back of his skull against the support behind him in a wet red burst. For half a second, the entire loop forgot what sound it was supposed to make. Then everyone started yelling at once. John used the panic. 2 more shots from the signal room dropped a guard and shattered another's pelvis. By the time the surviving men turned toward the firing angle, he was already gone. That was the moment the architecture changed hands. Rook was dead. Sarah was down. Finn was dead. The floodgates were compromised. The relay routes were in question. Marlowe's system had stopped feeling organized and started feeling hunted. A battered station speaker crackled overhead. Then a voice came through. Calm, educated, controlled. "John." "Marlowe." The loop quieted just enough to hear him. "You've made your point," Marlowe said. "You can kill frightened men in a tunnel. Congratulations, but this does not end with me. It ends with every place you stop becoming more dangerous because of you." John stood in the dark and listened. You think this is about your dog, Marlowe continued. It's about ownership, roots, consequences. You killed some of my people, and now you want the man at the top. Very tidy, very dramatic, but systems do not die that way. John moved, following the speaker wire overhead. Marlowe's voice continued through the loop, no longer speaking to him alone, speaking to everyone. Ledger Liz is dead. Sarah is probably dead. Finn is dead. This is what failure looks like. Learn from it. That told John two things. First, Marlowe did not yet know who was alive or dead, only what silence suggested. Second, he was improvising, narrating control to preserve it. Good. A man forced to narrate his own power was already losing some of it. John found the relay room behind a collapsed ticket office on the west shelf. Two operators inside, one on headphones, one working the patch lines. They died before either understood that the room was no longer theirs. John cut the main relay, and the station's voice went dead. No more guard over the speakers. No more central theater. Now it was just tunnels, water, concrete, and men learning that fear worked both ways. He found a maintenance diagram on the wall and traced the only route that fit Liz's description of Marlowe's preferred overlook. The station manager's old observation balcony on the northwest service edge. Good sight lines, emergency stair behind it, escape route to surface if the room went bad. John took the records corridor. It was narrow, lined with rusted cabinets and rotting paper, perfect ambush ground. Halfway through, a flashlight snapped on at the far end. "Stop there!" John didn't. The shotgun blast tore into the cabinets where his chest had been. He dropped flat at the beam's first flare, slid in damp paper pulp, and fired upward from the floor. The man with the shotgun jerked backward. Another rushed from a side office with a railroad spike. John kicked a drawer open into the man's shin, came up as the attacker stumbled, and put 2 rounds into him before he recovered. A third came from the shadows on his blind side and nearly got him. The spike punched through his coat and scored the ribs hard enough to drive a bright line of pain up his side. John trapped the wrist, slammed the man headfirst into a cabinet, broke the forearm against the edge, then ripped the spike free and buried it through the attacker's eye. He stepped back, breathing harder now. Blood warmed his side under the coat. Not deep enough to stop him, deep enough to matter. At the end of the hall, the overlook door stood half open with yellow light leaking beneath it. Voices beyond. "Told you he'd come through records," someone hissed. Then Marlowe, deeper and calmer than the others. "Prediction is in control." Footsteps retreated. John took position at the hinge side and listened. "There are still surface exits," another voice said. "Then use them," Marlowe replied. A pause, then quieter. "You're there, aren't you?" John said nothing. "Your breathing changed after the hallway," Marlowe said. "You're hurt." Still silence. Marlowe exhaled slowly. "I built this because the surface mistakes noise for power. Down here, systems matter. Tribute, information, predictability. You of all men should appreciate that." John opened the door. The overlook was a long chamber of cracked windows and rusted desks projecting above the central station bowl. Work lamps threw hard light over old control panels. At the far end stood Red Crown Marlowe. He was not what the Wasteland would have guessed from the name. No chemjaw, no war paint, no raider theatrics. Dark coat, reinforced leathers, compact rifle slung across the chest, pistol in one hand, hair trimmed close, eyes too intelligent to waste on swagger. He looked like a man who had once worked in rooms with paperwork and discovered he preferred rooms where paperwork could scream. Beside him stood one last guard with a revolver held too tightly. Marlowe studied John the way accountants studied a bad number. The guard panicked first. He fired. John shot him through the throat before the echo finished. The body dropped between them. Marlowe did not flinch. "Impressive." John advanced one step. Marlowe raised the pistol slightly. "You think this ends with me bleeding and you walking away? It doesn't. I have people in relay dens, bars, camps, root houses, settlements too scared to say my name loudly. Kill me, and they scatter for a month, maybe 2. Then they remember the man who came for my dog hunter, and suddenly every road you travel gets more expensive." John's answer came quiet. "That's noise." Something shifted in Marlowe's eyes. Not fear. Recognition. At last, he understood he was speaking to a man who could not be managed through consequence. "I was hoping," Marlowe said, "you'd be worth the trouble." He fired. John moved with the shot, diving left behind an overturned desk as rounds punched through rusted steel. He answered low, aiming through the gap for the legs. Marlowe was already moving too, using the dead guard's body for fractional cover while he cut toward the support pillar by the emergency stair. Professional. Finally. The overlook erupted. Marlowe fired in short, disciplined bursts, never wasting a round. John shifted cover on instinct, returning fire only when angles offered something real. Glass blew outward over the station bowl. Steel sparked. The dead guard's body jerked under stray hits. Marlowe's retreat line was obvious now. Emergency stair behind him, narrow and easily defensible if reached in time. John needed to break the pattern. He seized the dead guard's coat, dragged the body into Marlowe's sightline, and came up firing from the opposite side in the same motion. Marlowe twisted. One round tore across his upper arm. The second shattered concrete where his head had been. He returned fire instantly, and one of the rounds punched into John's already scored ribs, turning the earlier pain into something hot and immediate. John staggered against an old control console. Marlowe advanced half a step, aggressive, smelling advantage. John shot through the console panel. The round hit Marlowe in the thigh. This time, he did react. Hard. He slammed against the stair rail, caught himself, and fired blind as he fell back through the emergency door. The shot chewed metal from the frame beside John's shoulder. Then Marlowe was gone, up the stairs. John crossed the room fast despite the pain. He hit the door and found it chained from the outside through the crash bar. Marlowe hadn't just fled. He'd bought distance. Through the wired glass pane, the stairwell spiraled upward into darkness. No sight of him. John stepped back, one hand pressed to his side to judge the bleeding. Then he pulled one of the salvaged grenades, wedged it through the chain loop, and turned away. The blast blew the door inward in a howl of steel and dust. He started up the stairs. Above him, Marlowe was bleeding and running for the surface. Below him, Park Street's lower empire was collapsing into confusion without a voice to organize it. And across Boston, the story was already mutating. A stranger had gone under the city after Red Crown. Rook was dead. The tunnels were on fire. Marlowe was running. That was no longer rumor. That was political weather. Because the Commonwealth understood many things. But one lesson traveled faster than most. Anyone could kill in the Wasteland. Very few people could make killers afraid. John Wick climbed the emergency stair into the dark after Red Crown Marlowe, and for the first time since the wounded dog hit the floor of his cabin, the shape of the war changed. This was not revenge anymore. Not only revenge. Now it was proof. Proof that a man could walk into the hidden machinery of Commonwealth violence and tear it apart with precision. Proof that systems built on fear became fragile the moment fear changed owners. Proof that under Boston streets, someone had just shown the city what a professional looked like. and men in places of power. Good neighbor, Brotherhood checkpoints, gunner outposts, Institute observation posts hidden where no one knew to look. We're going to hear about that by morning. Some would call it an opportunity. Some would call it a threat. Most would call it the same thing in different words. A problem. And John Wick was still climbing. Red Crown Marlowe did not die in the stairwell. Not that night. John came out of the emergency exit onto a roofline choked with rusted vents and rain-black tar, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his ribs, and found only blood, shell casings, and the fading echo of a man who had escaped by seconds. Marlowe had left a wet trail across the gravel, over the edge, and down a fire escape to the alley below. By the time John reached the street, there was nothing left but taillights in the distance and 3 dead scouts who had stayed behind just long enough to slow pursuit. John killed them all in under 20 seconds, not because he thought one of them was Marlowe, not because rage had made him sloppy, because they were armed. They were in his way, and the last one tried to laugh when he saw the blood on John's coat. That laugh ended first. Then the street went quiet. John stood in the mouth of the alley with one hand at his side, and the city spread around him in layers of smoke, neon, old brick, and the hard glitter of rainwater under weak electrical light. Marlowe was alive, wounded, running. That mattered. But so did everything else. Rook was dead. The lower Park Street loop was broken. The relay system had been cut. The tunnel men who survived would be climbing into the city before dawn with panic in their mouths and John Wick's name attached to every sentence. That would move faster than bullets. Good. He turned back toward Good Neighbor. The city tried to slow him on the way in. Pain in the ribs, blood loss, a stiffness in the shoulder where flying metal had chewed skin in the Overlook fight. But John had worked hurt before. He understood the difference between damage and failure, and nothing in him had failed yet. By the time he reached Daisy's lower corridor, the sun was just beginning to drag itself up behind the dead skyline. Daisy looked up from her ledger as the shop door opened. Then she froze. Not because John was there, because he was there, still moving, coat torn, blood at the ribs. Soot and tunnel grime worked deep into the seams of his hands, and in his face, under all of that, the same impossible stillness as before. "Well," Daisy said after a beat, "that's either good news or a very stubborn corpse." John crossed to the counter and laid 3 things down in order. Rook's red cloth tag, a relay ledger page with Marlowe's route marks, and the emergency stair key taken off one of Marlowe's dead men. Daisy looked at them, then at him. "Ah," she said softly. "Good news for everyone except the people who needed those. Need a doctor." She didn't ask questions, just came around the counter, opened a side door, and jerked her head toward the back room. "Sit before you bleed on anything I might sell." John sat. Daisy patched him up with the hard competence of someone who had watched civilization die and learned not to romanticize simple tasks. Alcohol, bandages, needle, thread, no speeches. Halfway through stitching the worst of the wound at his ribs, she said, "Did Marlowe live?" "Yes." "Shame. He won't run far." Daisy tied off the thread. "No. Men like that never do. Their whole identity depends on being available enough for fear to circulate." She taped fresh bandaging over the stitched wound and stepped back to inspect her work. "You're gonna tear that open again if you do anything ambitious in the next hour." John stood. Daisy stared at him. "Of course you are." He turned for the door. "Wick." He stopped. Daisy's ruined face had gone serious in a way it rarely did. "What you did under Park Street last night didn't just hurt Marlowe. It shifted the city. People are going to start asking whether Red Crown is bleeding to death and who gets to buy the body. Good neighbor will smile, gunners will circle, Brotherhood will posture. Anybody with a gun and ambition is going to think there's room now. Then they'll learn. Daisy watched him another moment, then gave a dry, approving nod. Yes, I imagine they will. Outside, good neighbor felt different than it had the night before. Not calmer, not safer, more alert. The city had heard the story and was recalculating itself around it. Men on stoops stopped talking when John passed. Chem runners glanced twice. A woman selling ammunition beneath a broken marquee stared openly at the blood on his coat, then at the red cloth in his hand, and muttered something to the man beside her. At the gate, the human guard who had mocked his caps the night before straightened immediately when he approached. The ghoul with the shotgun looked him over once and grunted. "You look worse." John kept walking. The ghoul's burned mouth curved slightly. "So does everybody else this morning." That was enough. By noon, the first new rumor reached Bunker Hill. By mid-afternoon, a gunner scout reported unusual movement among tunnel smugglers near Cambridge and attached one name to the change, Wick. By sunset, a Brotherhood patrol near the old rail line sent a coded message up the chain about destabilization in Red Crown sectors and the growing likelihood that an unaffiliated surface combatant had become a strategic factor. And deeper than any of them, where hidden microphones and patient eyes watched the Commonwealth from places no settler would ever find, someone in the Institute logged a new variable into a system that preferred all variables manageable. John Wick. Status. Active. Effect. Disproportionate. Recommendation. Observe. But all of that came later. First, John went back to the cabin. He made the trip with less speed than before and more caution because pain was a liar and blood loss made honest men stupid if they let it. He reached the pines by dusk. The cabin stood where he had left it. The shell trap over the rear window was intact. The bell line hung untripped. When he stepped inside, the dog raised its head from the blanket near the stove. Alive. Eyes clearer now. Breathing easier. One leg still splinted and useless, but the tail thumped once against the floorboards. John crossed the room and knelt beside it. For a moment, he said nothing, just rested a hand at the side of its neck and felt the warmth there. The animal leaned weakly into the touch. That was enough. "I told you." The dog's ears twitched. John fed it by hand, changed the bandages, checked the swelling in the leg, and gave it water before he touched his own wounds again. The cabin still smelled of blood, wet pine, and wood smoke. Outside, the Commonwealth was changing direction around a fight most people only knew through rumor. Inside, one small breathing thing had survived the night. He sat beside the stove long after dark and let the silence hold. Not because he was resting, because he was thinking. Marlowe was alive. That meant the story was not finished. But after Park Street, this was no longer a simple hunt. Now there was vacuum. Vacuum always invited teeth. If he killed Marlowe tomorrow, something else would rise in the tunnels next week. Gunners would buy the routes. Raiders would fracture and reform. Good neighbor would exploit it until the cost got inconvenient. Brotherhood would talk about order. Settlers would still be prey to whichever system learned fastest that roads could be priced. John knew that pattern. He had spent too much of his life in systems like that. The high table had called itself structure. Crime families had called themselves order. Hotels, markers, blood debts, excommunications, civilization with better tailoring, and a body count hidden in the walls. The Commonwealth was not different in kind, just in costume. He looked at the dog sleeping by the stove and understood, perhaps for the first time since coming to the Wasteland, that killing Marlowe would not be enough. The roads had to change. That thought stayed with him through the night and followed him back into Boston the next morning. Good Neighbor greeted him like a man returning from war with receipts. Hancock was waiting in the old State House with boots on his desk and a bottle half empty enough to imply thought. Nick Valentine leaned against a filing cabinet by the window, hat low, expression unreadable except around the eyes where the interest always lived. Hancock looked up when John entered. "Well," he said, "if it isn't the reason my city's had more whispered conversations in 12 hours than a brothel with a blackout." John stayed standing. Nick tipped his head. "Marlowe?" "Alive." Hancock sighed. "That'd be the part I was afraid of. Dead men are simpler. Dead men don't reorganize." John said he won't have time. That made Hancock study him more carefully. "See, that's the sentence that worries me, not because I disagree. Because men who say it usually mean they've already decided what the city's going to look like after." Nick straightened from the cabinet. "And have you?" John's gaze shifted between them. "Yes." Hancock laughed once, low and real. "Now we're getting somewhere." He took his boots off the desk and leaned forward. "All right, cards up. Marlowe's been bad for business, bad for roads, and bad for my patience. But if he falls, the Commonwealth's bigger predators move in fast. Gunners buy the routes. Brotherhood installs checkpoints and calls it charity. Every little raider saint with a rifle starts auditioning for succession. So if you've got some grand thought beyond revenge, this is where you stop being mysterious and start being useful." John looked at Nick first. Nick gave the slightest nod, as if to say, they've earned enough truth to matter. So John told them. Not all of it. Not the Continental. Not the full architecture of what the old world had built in blood and etiquette. But enough. "There has to be neutral ground," he said. "Protected routes. Consequences that apply no matter who's paying. Caravans that can move under contract. Places where debts get settled without everyone reaching for a gun first." For the first time since he'd met him, Hancock said nothing immediately. Nick broke the silence. "You're talking about replacing Marlowe." "No," John said. "I'm talking about replacing his logic." That landed harder than anything else in the room. Hancock sat back slowly. "That," he said, "is either the smartest thing I've heard all month, or the opening line of a very expensive catastrophe." Nick's synthetic face tightened in thought. "No, he's right. The Commonwealth keeps bouncing between random chaos and faction control because nobody's built a third option, something enforceable without being expansionist." Hancock looked at him. "You saying we let our friend here build his own city-state?" "I'm saying roads don't care who makes them safer." John said, "Not a state. Rules." Hancock pointed at him. "That's exactly the kind of sentence tyrants love." "No," John replied. "Tyrants love obedience. I'm talking about accountability." The room went still again. That was when the knock came at the office door. Not a tentative one, not a polite one. Measured, deliberate. Hancock's expression flattened. "Come in." Paladin Mercer stepped through in Brotherhood field gear with 2 soldiers behind him, all hard edges and official business. He stopped just inside the room and looked directly at John. "As expected," Hancock muttered. "Every bad meeting eventually gets uniforms." Mercer ignored him. "Reports from Park Street confirm Red Crown losses in excess of 40%. Relay collapse, surface withdrawals, scout net failure. Marlowe is consolidating north and east." His eyes never left John. "The Commonwealth is moving." John said, "So am I." Mercer nodded once. "That is precisely the issue." He approached the desk and laid down a folded paper. Brotherhood seal, clean handwriting. "By authority of the Brotherhood of Steel," he said, All independent armed movement through 3 designated urban sectors is now restricted pending stabilization operations. Hancock stared at the paper like it smelled worse than expected. You block half the roads around Goodneighbor and call it stabilization. Mercer answered him without looking away from John. We are preventing opportunistic collapse. John's voice stayed flat. You're claiming Marlowe's roots before the body cools. Mercer's jaw tightened. We are preventing criminal reclamation. Nick gave a dry little laugh. Those are often the same thing in cleaner language. Mercer turned to John fully now. You have proven capable. That is not the same as accountable. If Marlowe's network collapses into open conflict, civilian casualties increase. I will not allow one unaffiliated operator to trigger a wider urban crisis because he believes his private war justifies strategic disruption. Then get out of the way, John said, or finish him yourself. Mercer held his gaze. That may happen, John answered. No, it won't. The Brotherhood soldiers behind Mercer shifted almost imperceptibly at the tone. Hancock watched the exchange with something between amusement and concern. This is the part where I ask everyone very politely not to turn my office into a demonstration. Mercer reached into a pouch at his belt and placed a second document beside the first. There is another factor. Nick stepped closer to read over Hancock's shoulder, his brow furrowed. Gunners. Mercer nodded. Intercepted message traffic. Gunner units from Quincy and elevated highway sectors are moving north. They believe the Red Crown collapse has opened high-value corridor acquisition opportunities. Hancock cursed softly. Nick looked at John. There's your vacuum, Mercer said. This is now larger than vengeance. John's answer came without hesitation. I know. Hancock rose from the desk, bottle forgotten. All right, then here's where we're at. Marlowe's wounded and regrouping. Brotherhood wants checkpoints. Gunners smell profit. My city's about to become everybody's favorite crossroads. If this turns into open fighting, every caravan from here to Bunker Hill starts bleeding. Nick said, Then we cut the chain before it hardens. All eyes went to him. Nick continued, Marlowe needs to die. That part doesn't change. But after that, if either Gunners or Brotherhood plant flags in those routes, the city just trades one extortion system for another, which means the only way this works is if the roads become expensive to own and easier to use. Hancock looked at John slowly. Neutral ground. John nodded. Mercer's expression cooled. You are discussing the creation of a private security regime in the middle of Commonwealth infrastructure. Hancock gave him a tired smile. And you're discussing public annexation with better branding. Let's not get precious. Mercer's gaze sharpened. Goodneighbor is not recognized authority. Hancock spread his hands. And yet people keep asking permission on my streets. Funny how that works. John stepped toward the desk. Where's Marlowe? Mercer said intel suggests old financial district access. Upper tunnels tied to pre-war tower sublevels. He's moving toward fortified vertical ground. Nick's eyes narrowed. Lucky 38 logic. Hancock looked at him. Wrong franchise, detective. Nick ignored that. Point is, tower access means a hard hold, secure upper floors, narrow entries, visibility over approach routes. If Marlowe gets dug in there and the gunners arrive before he dies, this turns into a three-way shootout in the middle of the city. John took in the map coordinates Mercer had brought. A pre-war hotel tower near the financial district. Luxury bones. Thick walls. Private service access. Generator backup still partially functional according to Brotherhood scans. He saw it immediately, not just as Marlowe's next stand, but as something else. A structure built for hierarchy, for reception, for control of entry and exit, for sanctuary. He looked up from the paper. Hancock noticed the change first. "You've got that look." Nick asked. "What look?" "The one where a man stops seeing the fight and starts seeing what comes after it." John folded the map. "I need the tower." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "For what?" John answered honestly. "For the roads." Hancock stared at him for one full second, then let out a disbelieving breath. "You absolute lunatic. You're serious?" "Yes." Nick looked from John to the map, and then, slowly, understanding dawned. "A sanctuary." Mercer's expression hardened. "No." John met his gaze. "Marlowe dies there. After that, nobody owns those approaches unless they accept terms." Mercer took a step closer. "You do not have the authority to impose terms on Commonwealth movement corridors." John's voice did not rise. "Watch me." For a heartbeat, the room felt like it might split open around that line. Then Hancock started laughing. Not because it was funny. Because it was impossible not to respect the audacity. "Oh, this is bad," he said, wiping at one eye. "This is very, very bad, because now I want to see if he can do it." Nick's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "That makes two of us." Mercer did not smile. "If you move on that tower without coordination, the Brotherhood will intervene." John turned for the door. "Then coordinate." Mercer called after him. "Wick." John stopped, but did not turn. "This ends one of two ways," Mercer said. "Either you help stabilize the city under terms others can verify, or you become another warlord to eliminate." John looked back over one shoulder. "No," he said. "That's your mistake." Mercer waited. John finished the sentence in the same calm tone he used for everything that mattered. "Warlords need followers. I need rules." Then he left. Goodneighbor felt smaller after that meeting, as if the city had become too narrow for the size of what was coming. Rumor moved through it like current through exposed wire. Red Crown was cornered, the Brotherhood was moving, gunners were inbound. Hancock had not denied anything. Daisy was selling old transit maps at triple price, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, John Wick was apparently trying to claim a tower in the financial district for reasons no one could quite explain, and everybody assumed involved a lot of dead bodies. That part, at least, would prove accurate. John spent the afternoon moving through the city's edges, tracing approaches to the tower, checking sight lines, marking likely gunner ingress routes, and identifying which lower service entrances connected to the sublevels Marlowe was most likely using. Twice he saw Brotherhood patrols establishing quiet observation points. Once he saw gunners in the distance, 3-man advance team, good spacing, professional posture, black armor catching late light along a rooftop cut. They had come fast, as expected. At dusk, the Commonwealth gave him something else. On the edge of a ruined plaza not far from the financial district, where old planters split open around skeletal trees and rusted cars made shallow cover, John heard the low warning growl before he saw the source. He turned. A dog stood in the debris line between two smashed sedans. German shepherd build, strong shoulders, dust-brown coat. Scars old and honest. Eyes fixed on him with the same combination of caution and intelligence he remembered from another life. Around the neck hung a faded blue bandana and the remnant of an old harness. Dog meat. John knew the stories. Every survivor near Concord did. The wandering dog that attached itself to people worth following. The animal that found secrets, danger, and home with suspicious efficiency. The dog took 2 careful steps forward and stopped. John looked at it. The dog looked back. No immediate trust, no sentiment, just recognition. Maybe not of him, of type. John crouched slowly despite the pain in his side. "You've got bad timing." Dogmeat's ears twitched. John reached into a pocket, found the strip of jerky he had meant to keep for later, and set it down on the cracked pavement. The dog waited, then came forward, took the food, and backed up 3 paces to chew while never taking its eyes off him. John stood again. "Yeah," he murmured. "I know." Dogmeat followed him at a distance after that. Not close enough to claim him. Close enough to choose. The approach to the tower began just after full dark. Marlowe's new hold sat inside the lower and mid-level sections of a pre-war financial hotel. Marble lobby, dead chandeliers, private service corridors, reinforced elevator shafts, and enough vertical sight lines to make any direct assault expensive. His surviving Red Crown men had fortified the main doors with overturned furniture, steel plates, and at least 2 visible firing nests. The lower service entrance on the east side was mined. Upper windows glowed in scattered patterns, which meant backup power or generator strips. John watched all of it from a neighboring rooftop, while Dogmeat settled into shadow beside a broken HVAC unit, as though they had always worked together. To the north, he caught movement behind a rooftop parapet. Gunners. To the west, 3 brief pulses of light in sequence. Brotherhood optics. Everyone was in position. No one was acting first. They were waiting to see who bled for the building. John left the rooftop and went in alone through the loading tunnel beneath the old hotel kitchens. The service route had not made Daisy's maps because no one still living had sold it to her. But the city had patterns, and expensive places always hid the same things: staff access, refuse lifts, delivery cages, emergency routes for rich people who liked exits they never expected to use. The tunnel was half flooded and smelled of old grease, chemical rot, and dead vermin. Dogmeat moved silently behind him, stopping only once to paw at a pressure plate disguised in debris. John found the wire attached to it, disarmed the mine, and glanced back at the dog. Dogmeat looked unimpressed. "Good work," John said. The dog's tail moved once. Inside the sub-level, Marlowe's men had built a layered fallback. Kitchen barricade, generator room watch, 2-man post at the wine storage corridor. Better discipline than tunnel raiders, worse than mercs. John killed the first pair without firing a shot. Knife in the dark. Suppressed round through the eye. Bodies lowered. Keys taken. The 3rd man heard the wrong sound and turned just in time to see Dogmeat hit him low from the side. John finished the man before he recovered. The 4th got 1 panicked burst off from a submachine gun before John put 3 rounds through the service window he was firing from. Then the lower floor came awake. Shouts. Running feet. Marlowe's voice, somewhere above. Not panicked yet, but close enough to strain. John pushed through the kitchen, up the service stairs, and into the east lobby with Dogmeat tight behind him. The old marble room still carried traces of luxury under all the damage. Gold trim gone dull, columns cracked, chandeliers hanging dead and dusty from the ceiling. Now it was a kill box. Marlowe's men had the balconies. John had momentum. He rolled behind the concierge desk as fire rained down from the 2nd floor, marble exploding in white chips around him. Dogmeat vanished left into service shadow. John tracked muzzle flash, counted shooters, waited for the rhythm, then came up firing in controlled pairs. 1 man pitched over the balcony rail, another disappeared backward with half his face gone. A 3rd leaned too far and screamed when Dogmeat came out of nowhere onto his arm. John used the opening and dropped him through the throat. Above, Marlowe's voice finally cut through. "You think this changes anything?" John advanced toward the grand stair. "Yes." The answer was almost lost in the gunfire, but not entirely. He climbed through smoke, broken plaster, and the sound of a system dying. Each floor looked more defensive than the one below. Tighter holds, narrower angles, better men. Marlowe had pulled his core inward and upward the way wounded predators always did. On the fourth-floor landing, John finally saw him again. Marlowe stood at the far end of a corridor lined with luxury suites gone to ruin, limping slightly from the thigh wound, rifle in hand. 3 remaining guards spread along the hall with enough cover to make the approach costly. He looked tired now. Not beaten, just aware. "You're making the city ungovernable," Marlowe called. John kept moving, using the suite door frames, the pillars, the rhythm of fire. "No," he said, "you did that." Marlowe's mouth tightened. "And what are you building instead?" John shot one guard through the chest and dropped behind a pillar before the return burst chewed through the wallpaper above him. When he answered, his voice was flat and final. "Consequences." The corridor battle lasted less than a minute and felt much longer. Guard 1 fell trying to flank. Guard 2 died when Dogmeat drew his shot and John took his head off during the correction. Guard 3 managed to wound John high in the shoulder before a knife to the neck settled the matter. Then it was only Marlowe. He retreated into the penthouse suite at the corridor's end. John followed, bleeding from 3 places now and not slowing in any way that mattered. The suite had once belonged to men who believed money could purchase insulation from consequence. Private dining room, city view, thick doors, hidden bar. Bulletproof glass now starred by old impacts and tonight's new ones. Marlowe stood near the windows with the city behind him and the rifle lowered just enough to suggest conversation before death. "You'll never hold this," he said. John crossed the room 1 measured step at a time. "Maybe not. Then all of this is just theater." "No." Marlowe almost smiled. "You kill me. Gunners come in tomorrow. Brotherhood by tomorrow night. Everybody with a radio and a superiority complex starts calling Rhodes theirs. That's the Commonwealth. That's what it is." John stopped within killing distance. For the first time since they had met, there was something like weariness in Marlowe's eyes. "That's what it was," John said. Marlowe fired. John moved inside the barrel line, trapped the rifle, drove his elbow into Marlowe's throat, twisted the weapon free, and hit him with it hard enough to crack the cheekbone. Marlowe staggered into the bar, grabbed a broken bottle and slashed. Glass cut coat and skin. John caught the wrist, broke it across the edge of the marble counter, and drove Marlowe backward through the half-shattered table. The man hit the floor, gasping. John put the pistol on him. Marlowe looked up through blood and splintered wood, and finally understood that there was no line left to bargain across. "Then do it," he rasped. John's expression did not change. "I am." The shot echoed through the suite, down the corridor, out through the dead luxury shell of the tower, and into the Commonwealth night. Below, on surrounding rooftops and hidden observation points, Brotherhood scouts heard it. Gunner advance teams heard it. Good neighbor lookouts heard it. And every one of them understood the same thing at once. Red Crown Marlowe was dead. The vacuum had opened. The city waited to see who would move first. John crossed to the penthouse window and looked out over Boston. Ruins. Smoke. Neon. Roads. Territory pretending not to be territory. Then he picked up the hotel desk phone. Dead for 2 centuries, now wired by scavers into a local generator loop as a private intercom, and keyed the building PA system tied into the old hospitality grid. His voice went through the tower calm and level. "This building is neutral ground now." The words carried farther than he expected, through open corridors, down stairwells, out into lower floors where surviving Red Crown men still hid, into the lobby, into the loading tunnels, and maybe through the half-broken external speaker rig at the front canopy, out into the street itself. "No business will be conducted inside it. No blood will be spilled here unless I decide otherwise. Caravans under contract will be protected. Debts will be honored. Violence brought to this door will be answered. He released the button. Silence followed. Then, far below, a single gunshot cracked from the street. Gunners testing reaction. John looked down through the broken glass, tracked the muzzle flash to a black armored figure across the boulevard, and fired once. The gunner dropped where he stood. That was answer enough. Dogmeat came up beside him at the window and looked down too. John rested a hand briefly on the dog's neck. Outside, Boston shifted. Not all at once, not cleanly, but visibly. Brotherhood patrols held position instead of advancing. Gunner scouts pulled back to reevaluate. Good neighbor runners vanished into the alleys carrying news stories. And in the upper floors of a dead luxury tower, with Marlowe bleeding into shattered marble at his feet and Dogmeat standing watch at his side, John Wick claimed something the Commonwealth had almost forgotten was possible. Not a throne, not a faction, not a kingdom, a rule. The roads would answer to something new now, and by morning, everybody important was going to come find out what that meant. By sunrise, the tower had a dozen names. Good neighbor called it a stunt. The gunners called it a hostile takeover. The Brotherhood called it an unauthorized fortified hold over critical urban access. Caravanners who had the healthiest instincts of the whole Commonwealth called it something simpler. A chance. That was how these things began. Not with law, not with flags, not with speeches men were forced to pretend mattered. With somebody desperate enough to test whether a promise was real. The first caravan arrived before noon. 3 Brahmin, 2 guards, 1 driver old enough to know better than optimism, and still young enough to need it. They came slowly down the boulevard beneath the tower, eyes on every rooftop, every blown-out window, every alley mouth where a rifle might appear. One of the guards looked up at the half-shattered lobby windows and the dead gunner still lying across the street where John had dropped him the night before. "Keep moving," the driver muttered. John watched them from the second-floor balcony with Dogmeat beside him and a rifle resting low but ready. He had spent the morning doing what mattered, dragging bodies, checking sidelines, locking lower service entrances, marking defensible routes between the kitchen access, lobby, and upper floors, clearing the immediate suites of anything useful, dangerous, or flammable, putting Marlowe's surviving men, those smart enough to surrender, on their knees in the lobby and making them choose, leave their weapons and go, or stay and work under rules that would be enforced absolutely. Most left. A few stayed. Not because they trusted him, because they had seen enough under Marlowe to understand the difference between cruelty and structure. That mattered too. As the caravan crossed in front of the tower, one of the guards called up, voice shaking just enough to betray what courage cost him. "You the one set the rules?" John answered from above. "Yes." The driver glanced at the road north, then back to the building. "If we pass through and no one touches the Brahmin, what do we owe?" John said, "Nothing today." The driver squinted upward, suspicious of anything free in the Commonwealth. "Why?" John looked at the street, the dead gunner, the open approaches, the city listening. "Because somebody has to go first." The caravan rolled on. No shots followed. No ambush came. No toll was demanded. By the time they vanished around the next block, the first proof had entered the bloodstream of the Commonwealth. A route had opened. The Brotherhood arrived an hour later. Not Mercer alone this time. A full detachment. 2 knights in power armor, one in a battered T-60 suit marked with Brotherhood insignia so sharp it looked ideological, not decorative. Another in heavier modified plating carrying a minigun. Mercer himself wore field armor again rather than full plate, which told John he expected to talk before shooting and wanted the option to move. That was smart. Hancock came too, because of course he did. He arrived from the opposite side of the boulevard in a cloud of good neighbor irritation, flanked by 2 guards and Nick Valentine, who carried no obvious urgency except the kind that lived in the way he watched angles. They met in the dead center of the street between the tower and the old financial steps across from it, a place too open for lies to feel comfortable. Hancock looked up at the building and whistled. "You really did it." John stood at the top of the tower stairs with Dogmeat on the landing just behind him. "Yes." Mercer's gaze moved over the entrances, the upper windows, the newly cleared firing arcs, and the fresh body marks still dark on the marble inside the lobby. "This is not recognized ground." John said, "It is now." Mercer gave no visible reaction to that, but the knights behind him shifted weight in their armor. One of them, the minigun carrier, took a half-step forward before Mercer stopped him with a hand. Hancock grinned. "See, this is why I came in person. I wanted to watch the exact moment all the respectable factions realized the lunatic was serious." Nick lit a cigarette, though John had never seen him smoke more than 3 drags from any one of them. Historically, this is where the Commonwealth starts making a mess. Mercer spoke first and ignored both of them. "We have monitored corridor movement since dawn. Caravans are already adjusting course based on your claim. That is strategic interference." "No," John said, "that's trust." Mercer's expression hardened. "Trust without oversight becomes extortion very quickly." Hancock barked a laugh. "That line would work better if your people weren't standing in power armor outside someone else's front door." The Brotherhood knight with the minigun finally spoke. His voice came amplified and metallic through the helmet speaker. "Paladin, say the word." John's eyes moved to the suit. T-60. Maintained well. Servo response smooth. Armor joints reinforced but still vulnerable at the underarm and neck if one could get close enough, which most men couldn't. He filed all of that away in under a second. Mercer did not look back at the knight. "Not yet." He looked at John again. "Explain this." John did. Not in poetry. Not in ideology. Simple terms. No violence in the tower. No tolls on routes under contract. No faction ownership of neutral traffic. Debts honored. Caravans protected if they accept terms. Any attack on this ground answered immediately. Mercer listened without interruption. When John finished, the Paladin asked, "And who determines these terms?" "I do." "There it is," Mercer said. "Private sovereignty." "No," John answered. "Private accountability." Mercer let out a slow breath. "That difference means everything to you, and almost nothing to anyone looking at a rifle from the wrong end." Nick flicked ash into the gutter. "Only because the Commonwealth has spent too long mistaking organized force for moral legitimacy." Mercer turned slightly toward him. "You are defending a private armed actor setting transport policy in a contested urban corridor." Nick answered, "I'm pointing out that everybody in this conversation already does that. He's just being more honest about it." That earned a ghost of a smile from Hancock. Then the gunners arrived. Not in stealth, not in rumor, in steel. The first engine growl came from the west approach, deep and mechanical enough to change the tone of the whole street before anyone even saw the machines. Then 2 trucks rolled into view around the corner, armored in welded plate and scrap cage, followed by a 3rd vehicle carrying a mounted heavy machine gun. And behind them came the real message. Power armor. 2 suits. Not Brotherhood clean, not old world museum grade, but brutal, practical, gunner-maintained war machines. One looked like salvaged T-45 stripped down and rebuilt for intimidation and durability. The other had heavier chest plating and a repurposed shoulder mount rigged for rockets. They stopped 50 yards out. Men in black combat armor fanned around the vehicles with disciplined spacing, rifles up but not firing. Their commander stepped down from the lead truck in a long dark coat over tactical plating, helmet under one arm, close-cut hair, scar through one eyebrow, and the expression of a woman who had built her life out of profit and competence in equal measure. Commander Vale. John had not met her before, but he knew the type immediately. The kind of gunner officer who understood that contracts outlived individuals and leverage outlived sentiment. Dangerous because she did not need to enjoy violence to use it well. Vale looked from the Brotherhood line to Hancock, to John on the tower steps, and smiled once, thin and disappointed. "Well," she said, voice carrying clearly, "this is suddenly a much more interesting intersection." Hancock muttered, "And there's the third knife." Mercer's hand moved lower toward his weapon, not yet drawing. "Commander, withdraw your detachment. This zone is under Brotherhood review." Vale actually laughed. "No, Paladin. This zone is under market review." Her gaze lifted to John. "You're Wick." "Yes. Good work under Park Street. Expensive, but elegant." She looked up at the tower. "Bad long-term decision." John said, "You came to buy roads." "I came to prevent amateurs from inventing policy with a body count and a view." Vale gestured around at them. "Red Crown held those routes badly. You killed him. Congratulations. But roads, access points, and convoy lanes don't become neutral because one man says they are." Hancock said, "Funny. That's more or less what the Brotherhood was just implying in nicer words." Vale ignored him. "The gunners are prepared to formalize traffic security in this district. Contract rates, escort schedules, fixed arbitration. It'll cost less than chaos and more than fantasy." Nick exhaled smoke. "You mean extortion with invoices?" Vale's eyes flicked toward him. "I mean stability with enforcement." Mercer said, "The Brotherhood will not allow gunner annexation in a live civilian corridor." Vale smiled at that, too. "Then stop me." The street went still. This was the Commonwealth at its truest. Every side convinced its coercion was the reasonable one. Every gun owner pretending the problem was somebody else's relationship with force. John looked at Vale and asked the only question that mattered. "What happens to caravans that refuse your terms?" Vale answered honestly, which made her more dangerous. "The road teaches them." Hancock winced. "See, this is why everybody hates your salesmanship." Vale shifted her attention back to John. "Here's the deal. You walk away from the tower, and I leave your little experiment intact for 1 week while we sort acquisition. Maybe I even hire you afterward. Men with your skill set are rare." She glanced at Dogmeat. "Keep the dog." For a moment, no one moved. Then John stepped down one stair. "No." Vale's face changed almost imperceptibly. Not anger, reclassification. "Then this gets expensive." John took another step. "It already is." Vale signaled without looking away. The power-armored gunner on the right raised the shoulder launcher. Mercer shouted, "Down!" What followed happened too fast for politics to survive it. John hit the stone rail as the rocket streaked toward the tower entrance. The round blew the upper stair apart in a blast of fire, dust, and marble fragments. Dogmeat vanished sideways into lobby shadow. The Brotherhood Knight with the minigun opened up immediately, raking the gunner front line in a roar of tracers. Vale's riflemen fired back in disciplined bursts. Hancock dove behind a fountain base, swearing with real creative commitment. Nick pulled him the rest of the way down and returned fire from one knee without wasting a shot. The negotiations were over. The boulevard became war. John rolled through the blast debris and came up firing at the shoulder-mounted gunner suit before it could reload. His rounds sparked harmlessly off the chest plate, but the pilot turned toward him, which was enough. John tracked the motion, saw the exposed hydraulic seam at the left hip when the suit pivoted, and put 2 rounds into it. The armor staggered, leg locking halfway. Mercer moved at the same moment, laser fire cutting clean red lines across the street as he advanced toward cover with Brotherhood soldiers on either side. His knights were heavy enough to hold ground, but not agile enough to dominate the whole boulevard. Vale's people knew that and started splitting the field, forcing angles, using trucks and wrecked cars to channel the Brotherhood suits into poor lines of fire. Professional. John saw the shape immediately. This wasn't a chaotic gunner push. Vale had come expecting resistance and built for 3-way escalation. That meant she had probably seeded flank teams before showing herself. "Nick!" John shouted. The detective glanced up from behind a wrecked sedan. "Yeah?" "East rooftops." Nick did not ask how John knew. He simply pivoted, scanned once, and fired twice at a cornice line above the old bank across from the tower. A gunner sniper tumbled out into the open with half his shoulder gone. Hancock yelled from behind the fountain, "Hate to interrupt the professional murder seminar, but I've got a city to not lose." John pointed toward the tower lobby. "Inside, now!" Hancock saw the logic at once. Neutral ground meant nothing if it died in its first hour. He signaled his guards, and they made a hard sprint through drifting stone dust toward the tower entrance, while Brotherhood and gunner fire crossed behind them. Mercer caught the move and shouted, "Paladins, hold the line!" One Brotherhood knight in the minigun suit advanced into the center of the boulevard like a walking bunker and paid for it immediately. Vale's rocket-armored gunner, hip joint damaged but still functional, fired a short-range burst that clipped the Brotherhood suit in the shoulder. The blast spun the knight sideways into a wrecked bus and left the armor sparking violently. John used the distraction. He crossed from the tower steps to the disabled gunner suit in a low sprint, came in under the damaged side, jammed the knife into the exposed actuator housing at the hip, and drove upward with his full weight. The suit locked completely. The pilot roared inside the helmet and swung a plated arm down, missing John by inches and crushing the pavement instead. John climbed the armor itself, planted one boot against the stall leg housing, seized the helmet edge, and fired point blank into the visor seam. The suit went still. He dropped off the back and looked up just in time to see Vale reclassify him again. This time, the expression she wore was not irritation. It was respect sharpened into hostility. Then the ground shook. Not from artillery, not from Brotherhood heavy fire, from something alive. The roar came from the transit cut behind the western truck line, low and savage and wrong enough to break the rhythm of the whole battle for one stunned second. Vale turned first, Mercer second. The surviving gunner power armor pivoted toward the sound. Then the retaining wall near the old service ramp exploded outward in a shower of concrete and twisted rebar. Deathclaw. It came out of the dust like the Wasteland had grown teeth and decided negotiation was boring. Huge. Scarred. One horn broken halfway. Hide plated with old wounds and fresh fury. Likely driven up from buried access tunnels by the battle. Or maybe by the collapse and explosives around Park Street, rippling through systems nobody had checked. It did not matter. It hit the nearest gunner truck hard enough to flip it onto its starter side. The mounted gunner never even screamed. Every living thing on the boulevard had a new problem. Vale swore. Mercer barked orders. Hancock's voice carried from inside the lobby. "Oh, come on! That is not fair." The Deathclaw ripped through the truck cab and came out coated in oil and blood. Gunner riflemen fired at it on reflex. Brotherhood lasers lanced in from the flank. The beast roared and went for the loudest target, which happened to be the still-moving gunner power armor trying to bring its rocket system around. John saw the answer before anyone else did. He moved, not away from the Deathclaw, toward the second truck. He vaulted the hood, ripped open the passenger side compartment, and found exactly what he expected in a gunner rapid acquisition convoy: demolition satchels, spare rockets, and magnetic breaching charges. Vale saw him and shouted, "Kill him!" Too late. John grabbed 2 satchels and ran for the half-collapsed service ramp, just as the Deathclaw hit the gunner suit with enough force to drive both of them through the boulevard divider. The power armor pilot fired point-blank into the beast's side. The rocket detonated badly, throwing both apart in a wave of dust and fire. The Deathclaw survived. Of course it did. Badly burned now, one forelimb bloodied, but alive and angrier. Mercer shouted, "Fall back to hard cover!" Brotherhood soldiers shifted toward the bank steps, gunners toward the eastern vehicles. Goodneighbor had already made the sensible choice and gone mostly inside. John reached the shattered retaining line above the old transit cut and looked down. Below the broken wall sat a buried service tunnel opening, widened by the Deathclaw's emergence and leading back into unstable substructure. Old concrete, gas lines, support columns already cracked. Good. He armed the first satchel and threw it deep into the opening. The second he fixed to the exposed support brace nearest the mouth. Dogmeat appeared beside him as if summoned from the dust, ears back, body low. John looked down the line toward the Deathclaw as it charged uphill through smoke and debris, straight toward the tower now, because the tower still held the most movement and the cleanest vertical shape for violence to hate. "Go," John said. Dogmeat moved instantly toward lobby cover. John fired 3 rounds into the air above the beast's head, not to hurt it, just to pull the line, then ran hard across the broken pavement toward the tower steps. The Deathclaw followed. Mercer saw the angle and understood exactly 1 second before everyone else. "Move!" he shouted. "Move!" John hit the detonator just as he cleared the lower stair. The first blast tore through the service tunnel and collapsed the weakened mouth inward. The second caught the support brace and brought half the retaining edge down on top of it. Concrete, rebar, and 100 years of bad engineering dropped onto the charging Deathclaw in one thunderous collapse. Dust swallowed the boulevard. When it cleared, the beast was gone beneath tons of wreckage, one clawed arm still visible for a moment before it stopped moving entirely. Silence held. Then Hancock's voice floated from the lobby. "I'm putting that in the brochure." No one laughed, because the field had changed. One gunner power armor suit was dead. The second was damaged and backing off with servo problems. A truck was burning. A Deathclaw was buried under a collapsed service cut. Brotherhood had casualties but still held formation. And John Wick was standing on the tower steps in smoke and rubble, looking like he had planned for every ugly thing except maybe the exact size of the Deathclaw. Vale stared at him from across the ruined street. The calculation in her eyes had shifted from acquisition to cost. Mercer saw it too. The paladin stepped forward into the dust, lowered his rifle fractionally, and said, "This ends now." Vale looked from him to John to the tower. Then she made the smart choice. Not surrender. Not apology. Withdrawal. She gave 2 hand signals. Gunners began pulling back in disciplined teams, covering one another, recovering what wounded they could, and abandoning what dead they had to. The damaged power armor suit moved last, limping behind the retreating line, like an insult that had not fully accepted defeat. Vale herself backed toward the surviving truck, never quite taking her eyes off John. "This isn't over," she said. John replied, "I know." Vale gave one sharp nod, climbed into the truck, and the convoy pulled away. The Brotherhood held position until the last gunner disappeared into the maze of streets. Then Mercer turned to John. The boulevard between them was a ruin now. Burning truck, broken armor, dead men from 3 factions, half the tower stair blown apart, concrete dust still drifting over the buried Deathclaw. Mercer looked at the building, at the road, at the caravan route that had passed safely that morning, at the dead gunner by the boulevard edge, at John himself. Then he said the most important thing he could have said. "We're not done." John answered, "No." Mercer nodded once. "But the Brotherhood is standing down here, for now." That was not approval. It was not alliance. It was recognition. Hancock emerged from the lobby, brushing dust from his coat and looking delighted in the way only deeply irresponsible civic leaders could be when history became entertaining. "Well," he said, surveying the street, "this is either the beginning of a safer Commonwealth or the exact point where everything gets much, much worse." Nick came out beside him, smoke-blackened and somehow even more tired around the eyes than usual. Those are usually the same point. Mercer looked at John one final time. "If this neutral ground survives the week, I will return with terms." John said, "Good." The paladin turned and led his detachment out of the district. And just like that, the road had survived its first real test. Not because everyone agreed, because nobody had won by taking it. By evening, the story had spread farther than any caravan ever could. Wick held the tower. The gunners tried to take it and failed. The Brotherhood didn't move him. A Deathclaw came out of the street and died for the attempt. Caravans were already redirecting toward the district. Goodneighbor was pretending it had expected this. That night, by lantern and scavenged generator light, the second caravan came. Then the third. No tolls, no ambush, no extortion, just movement. Inside a tower, Hancock stood in the old lobby beneath a dead chandelier and turned slowly in a circle, taking in the marble, the blood, the cracked reception desk, the blown stair, and the surviving route men John had chosen not to drive out. "You know," he said, "with enough booze and worse taste, this place could almost pass for class." Nick was seated on the concierge counter cleaning a pistol he did not technically own. Dog meat lay at his feet for reasons neither man fully understood, and both accepted. John stood behind what had once been the front desk, sorting weapons, ledgers, route lists, and names. Hancock watched him for a moment. "So, what do we call it?" John did not look up. "Nothing? That's not how people work." Nick said, "He's right. If you don't name it, the Commonwealth will, and then you'll be stuck with whatever the drunkest caravaner says first." Hancock smiled. "Which, to be fair, might still be an improvement over our current civic process." John placed a ledger on the desk and finally looked up. "It doesn't need a name." Hancock leaned on the marble counter opposite him. "No, it needs rules, roads, some poor bastards at the doors, and a way to make sure people know all of that without getting shot asking. The name comes free." John thought for a beat. Then he said, "The Continental." The room held still. Hancock's grin faded into something more curious. "That sounds expensive." Nick's eyes sharpened. "Old world?" "Yes." Hancock looked around the lobby again, as if seeing the building differently now. "The Continental," he repeated. "Yeah, all right. That's got enough weight to scare the right people and attract the wrong ones." "Perfect." Nick holstered the pistol. "Then the Commonwealth has a new problem." John looked toward the door, toward the roads beyond, toward the city already rearranging itself around a rule no faction had authorized and none had yet broken successfully. "No," he said. Nick tilted his head. "No?" John's gaze stayed on the entrance. A new standard. Outside, a fourth caravan rolled safely past the tower, under the watch of men who did not entirely trust one another, and therefore, for now, had no choice but to honor the rules. Inside, beneath dead chandeliers and the bones of old luxury, with dog meat sleeping by the desk and the first ledgers of a new order beginning to stack in front of him, John Wick understood the real cost of what he had done. He had not just killed a man. He had created an alternative, and alternatives were what power feared most. It had noticed. Now it would decide whether to live with the Continental, buy it, bend it, or burn it down. And if it chose the last one, John Wick would be waiting. The first week of the Continental did not feel like a victory. Victories in the Commonwealth were loud, short, and usually followed by scavengers. This was different. This was waiting, watching, measuring whether the world would tolerate a new rule long enough for it to become real. That made it more dangerous than battle. By the third day, caravans had begun rerouting on purpose. Not all of them. The brave ones first, then the desperate ones, then the practical ones who had seen enough of the road to understand what mattered, not speeches, not ideology, not whether the man at the desk had a past worth fearing. What mattered was that Brahmin loaded under the tower and left under the tower, and nobody took a shot at them. That was enough to change maps. The Continental's lobby had once been built to impress dead men with money. Marble floors, brass fixtures, wide stairs, dead chandeliers hanging like fossils from a world that thought elegance could outlast consequence. Now it had been rebuilt into something harder. Reception desk repaired. Kill angles established. Lower service routes barricaded. Old guest registry drawers repurposed for route ledgers, contracts, and names. The Eastern Corridor became neutral meeting ground, or CE. The old bar became infirmary and supply room. The roofline held lookouts 24 hours a day. John worked all of it himself at first, then with the handful of men and women who stayed after Marlowe died and proved willing to obey rules if the rules did not humiliate them. That was the difference. Marlowe had ruled through fear and appetite. John ruled through consequence. No abuse under his roof. No touching caravans under contract. No business settled in the lobby. No lies in arbitration. No one armed against the desk unless invited to be. The first man to test that last rule lost 2 fingers and left the building alive enough to explain why. After that, enforcement became mostly theoretical. Nick Valentine took to the place faster than anyone expected, which meant he took to it exactly as John might have guessed if he had known the detective longer. He turned an old accounting office on the mezzanine into a records room, built route charts from memory and scavenged reports, and somehow made the madness of Commonwealth movement patterns look almost legible pinned across a wall in string and notes. Hancock came and went whenever the whim or the politics took him, which was often enough to matter and rarely enough to be a burden. He insisted the lobby needed music and better liquor. John allowed one of those. Dog meat never officially belonged to anyone. He simply chose the Continental the way he had once chosen the road, and after a week no one could remember the building without him. He slept by the desk in daylight, vanished into the lower floors at night, and somehow always knew who was dangerous before they reached the front steps. John returned to the cabin twice during that first week. The wounded dog there, his first dog, the one who had crawled back to him bleeding through the storm, healed slowly, angrily, and without sentiment. The leg would never be perfect again, but it held weight by the end of the week and the eyes had cleared. John brought food, medicine, and silence. He never brought the animal into Boston. Some things were safer beyond the city. Some things should remain outside politics. Still, each time he left the cabin for the Continental, he felt the same old tension beneath the ribs. One life in the woods, one in the city, one quiet thing, one violent system trying to become order. The Commonwealth, meanwhile, did what it always did when something new refused to die quickly enough. It adapted. The Brotherhood stopped short of open hostility, but increased patrols around the district. Officially, it was urban stabilization. Unofficially, Mercer was watching to see whether John's rules held under pressure. The gunners did not return openly after the boulevard fight, but their scouts multiplied. Rooftop silhouettes, intercepted messages, bought informants sniffing around route contracts. Commander Vale had taken the loss personally enough to be dangerous and professionally enough not to show it. Goodneighbor never admitted the Continental helped its trade, but Hancock stopped complaining about the caravan numbers moving through his sphere. That was as close to civic endorsement as anyone needed. And deeper than all of them, in places no citizen saw, the Institute continued to watch. They did not care about roads because they loved roads. They cared because stable roads changed settlements. Changed settlements changed regional patterns. Changed regional patterns made surface unpredictability harder to model. The Continental had become a variable, and the Institute hated variables. The pressure announced itself on the 8th night. Not with an army, not at first. With a girl no older than 16, stumbling into the lobby after midnight, half carrying a bloodied caravan guard twice her size. Dogmeat met them at the door before the night watch could raise a weapon. The girl nearly collapsed at the sight of him, then looked up at John behind the desk and seemed to realize all at once that she had reached the right place, or the worst possible one. "Please," she said, voice raw. "They said the road was yours now." John was moving before she finished. The guard had been hit twice, one round through the side, one through the shoulder, not clean wounds, gunner rounds by the look of them. Military issue, not scavered junk. The man was conscious enough to choke on pain, but not enough to shape a full sentence. Nick came down from the mezzanine with medical supplies, while Hancock, who had been halfway through a bottle and pretending he was only staying the night for political convenience, snapped instantly sober. "Who did this?" The girl swallowed hard. "Checkpoint east of Cambridge. Black armor. They took the Brahmin. Said the road was closed. Said if we wanted safe passage, we needed a gunner's stamp from now on." John's expression did not change. "Vale," Nick said. The girl nodded too quickly. "They knew about the Continental. They said this was the answer." That was enough. The room shifted. Not physically, structurally, because everybody in it understood the meaning. The gunners were not probing now. They were challenging the rule itself. If John let that stand, even once, the Continental stopped being a system and became a rumor. Another short-lived experiment. Another dead ideal wrapped around a lobby desk and a body count. John looked at the guard on the floor, then at the girl. "What route?" She told him. He turned to Nick. "Keep him alive." Nick nodded once. To Hancock, "No one leaves the building armed unless they're ours." Hancock grinned without humor. Now that sounds like the beginning of a very educational night. John was already moving to the weapons room. The Brotherhood arrived before he left. Mercer walked into the lobby with 2 knights and the expression of a man who had been expecting exactly this kind of escalation and hated being right on schedule. He took in the wounded guard, the terrified girl, the way John was gearing up with spare magazines and a suppressed rifle, and understood most of the story without needing a briefing. "Vale?" "Yes," John said. Mercer exhaled once. "We intercepted gunner chatter 30 minutes ago. Coordinated pressure on caravan lanes, simultaneous extortion, route disruption, and a planned strike on this district if the response looked weak." Hancock raised a brow. "You know, I'd complain you sat on that information, but we both know you only walked in here because now it affects your map too. Mercer ignored him. This is no longer about private road control. The gunners are attempting corridor annexation at scale. Nick, binding the guard's shoulder, said, which is a fancier way of saying they're trying to make your whole system irrelevant by morning. John checked the rifle once and looked at Mercer. Where's Vale? Mercer answered immediately. Old customs exchange south of the river. Converted command node. She's coordinating mobile teams from there. Then that's where I'm going. Mercer's jaw tightened. No, that's where we are going. The room went still. Hancock looked almost delighted. Oh, this should be good. John's eyes narrowed slightly. Why? Mercer took one step closer. Because if you hit that node alone and fail, the gunners frame this as your private war collapsing under its own weight. If you hit it with Brotherhood support, the roads do not become Brotherhood territory, but the challenge becomes public, undeniable, and expensive enough that every mercenary in the Commonwealth thinks twice before copying it. Nick glanced up from the wounded guard. You offering alliance or leverage? Mercer answered, both. John considered him. Mercer continued, I still do not trust your end state. I still think private order is one bad day away from becoming another flag. But Commander Vale is worse, and she moves faster through markets than we do through doctrine. If she breaks your roads now, she turns half the Eastern Commonwealth into a price sheet by winter. His expression hardened. I will not allow that. There it was. Not friendship, not approval. Alignment. For now, that was enough. John nodded once. Good, Mercer said. Hancock spread his hands. Terrific, we finally achieved the Commonwealth dream. A ghoul mayor, a synthetic detective, a Brotherhood paladin, and John Wick coordinating policy at 2 a.m. over a bleeding caravan guard. Nick didn't look up. If you say it slowly, it almost sounds functional. They moved in under 20 minutes. The plan was simple, because the best plans usually were. Brotherhood would block southern exits and prevent reinforcement. Hancock's people would hold the Continental and protect the district. Nick would stay with the records, the roots, the wounded, and the politics no one else was patient enough to understand. John and Mercer would cut the head off the gunner operation before dawn. Dogmeat chose to go. Of course, he did. The customs exchange sat in the ruins of an old federal building near the waterfront, a thick-walled stone shell with underground storage, reinforced loading access, and just enough surviving communications equipment to coordinate a regional nuisance into a strategic problem. Vale knew infrastructure. John respected that even now. She had layered the approach well. Roof snipers, 2 exterior trucks, claymores on the service road, rifle teams in overlapping windows, at least 1 power armor suit visible in the side courtyard. Mercer studied the position through optics from the roofline opposite. She's expecting a direct answer. John looked at the courtyard. Then don't give her one. Mercer almost smiled. Good. Brotherhood teams moved first, quietly, setting outer containment in the surrounding ruins. No laser fire, no big declarations, just disciplined ghosts in pre-war rubble. John and Mercer went low through the flood channel beneath the exchange. Dogmeat ranged ahead and stopped twice at Mercer's silent signals, both times correctly identifying traps before either man saw the wire. Mercer glanced at the dog the second time and muttered, I'm filing a formal complaint that he may be better at this than some initiates. John said, probably. They came up through a maintenance breach into the exchange's sub-level archive room. Old record shelves, concrete pillars, 1 sentry with a headset and bad habits. Mercer killed him with the efficiency of a man who did not advertise how often he had needed to work at knife distance. They split there by necessity, not preference. Mercer went for the communications room. John went for Vale. He found the first sign of her in a war room built out of reclaimed customs offices on the second floor. Maps, route overlays, contract sheets, black armored officers passing ammunition and orders with clean discipline. Vale's version of power was never theatrical. It was administrative. John liked that less than madness. Madness was easier to interrupt. He killed the room in sequence. First the officer with the radio, then the one nearest the alarm switch, then the woman reaching for the map case. The fourth got a shot off into the ceiling before John crossed the table and drove the knife under the collarbone into the heart. Then the floor was quiet again, except for paper drifting down through powder smoke. He found Vale's current route package under a weighted clipboard. 3 simultaneous pressures, checkpoint seizures, caravan thefts, and one final line. If Wick responds in force, strike tower at dawn. Burn the myth. John folded the paper once and kept moving. Gunfire erupted 2 floors above. Mercer had found resistance. Or they had found him. Either way, the timeline had collapsed. John took the west stairwell 2 steps at a time and entered the top floor into a close-quarters fight already in motion. Brotherhood laser fire cut red through the hall. Gunners returned with ballistic rifles from suite doorways and overturned desks. One power-armored gunner held the corridor center with a heavy machine gun, turning the hall into shredded plaster and sparks. Mercer was pinned behind a load-bearing column with 2 knights and no room to maneuver. John saw the problem and the answer in the same second. The gunner's suit was braced forward, machine gun line fixed, back venting exposed toward the blown window line. He did not shoot. Instead, he smashed the hallway sprinkler pipe overhead with the rifle butt, flooding the corridor in cold water and steam. The machine gunner turned instinctively toward the sound and shifted half a degree. That was enough. Mercer saw it too. Brotherhood laser fire struck the venting seam on the back of the power armor unit at the exact moment John put 3 rounds into the right knee actuator. The suit buckled. The pilot overcorrected. The overheating vent blew in a wash of white flame, turning the machine into a screaming coffin. The corridor broke. Brotherhood surged. Gunners gave ground. John went through the center while the burning suit collapsed behind him. Vale was at the far end near the observation office, not fleeing, not yet. She had a rifle in one hand, sidearm already drawn in the other, and the look on her face was not fear. It was acceptance, sharpened by annoyance. "Should have killed you on the boulevard," she said. John kept coming. "Yes." She fired first. The rounds tore the frame beside his head. He returned with measured shots that forced her back into the office. Mercer shouted something behind him, but John had already entered. The final room overlooked the river through broken federal windows and smelled of dust, cordite, and old paper. Vale used the space well. Desk for cover, side filing cabinets for angles, one overturned steel shelf as fallback. Not a room for a dramatic duel. A room for professionals. Good. The firefight lasted maybe 20 seconds. She hit him once in the thigh. He cut her forearm with a grazing round and destroyed her rifle. She threw a steel stapler hard enough to distract, then came low with the sidearm. John trapped the gun hand, drove her into the filing cabinets, stripped the weapon, and slammed her against the glass so hard the cracked window webbed behind her. She kneed his wounded thigh. Pain flashed white-hot. He answered by putting his forearm across her throat and pinning her there. Up close, Commander Vale looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had built a life in markets where order was simply the most efficient way to package violence. "You could have worked with me," she rasped. "No, this place doesn't survive ideals." John pressed harder. "This place survives rules." She laughed through the pressure, breathless and disbelieving. "That's the same thing." "No," John said, "it isn't." He took the folded order sheet from his coat and shoved it against the cracked glass beside her head. Burn the myth. She saw it and said nothing. John let her look at her own handwriting for one beat. Then he continued, voice level. "You don't want roads. You want dependency." Her eyes flicked back to his, smart enough not to deny what didn't need denying. "Dependency pays." John nodded once. "Yes." Then he put the pistol under her chin. "This doesn't." The shot ended the conversation. By the time Brotherhood secured the top floor, Vale's command node was dead. Her officers were dead or captured. Her route packages were in Mercer's hands. Her trucks burned outside under controlled demolition. The remaining gunner teams, cut off from command and facing containment on 3 sides, broke before dawn. Some escaped. Most did not. Mercer found John in the observation office staring out over the river. "It's done," the paladin said. John didn't turn. "No." Mercer followed his gaze to the waking gray edge of the city. "You're right. Not yet." He stepped into the room and laid Vale's route package on the desk between them. "This is enough to break gunner leverage in the eastern sectors for months. Maybe longer if we move quickly." John looked at the papers. "You will." "Yes." There was no point pretending otherwise. Mercer studied him for a moment, then said, "The Brotherhood will not claim the Continental." That got John's attention. Mercer went on, "We will recognize it as neutral commercial ground under observation. No annexation, no checkpoint absorption, no interference in contract roads unless weapons, technology, or hostile faction traffic violate broader strategic concerns." He paused. "It is not the arrangement I would have built." "No," John said, "it isn't." "But it exists," Mercer replied. "And after tonight it has held against challenge. That matters." It was as close to formal recognition as the Brotherhood was capable of without writing a doctrine pamphlet about it. John nodded once. "Good." Mercer's expression shifted, just a fraction, enough to suggest a man privately adjusting his understanding of another man and not enjoying how much respect the process required. "When you said you didn't need followers," Mercer said, "I thought it was arrogance." John waited. Mercer looked back out over the river and the battered city beyond. "I was wrong." That was enough. They returned to the Continental after sunrise. The district around the tower was waking with the brittle, disbelieving energy of people who had gone to sleep under one political weather pattern and woken under another. Caravan drivers were already talking in circles outside the lobby. Good neighbor runners came and went with the speed of official denial, trying to keep up with economic opportunity. Brotherhood patrols stood back at measured distances, visible enough to be a statement and restrained enough to be another one. Hancock was in the lobby behind the desk, boots up, drink in hand, looking for all the world like the owner of an establishment that had survived a very stylish fire. Nick stood beside him with a ledger open, adding route numbers in the same expression with which other men wrote obituaries. When John entered, Hancock looked up and said, "You know, one day I'm going to stop being surprised when you leave at midnight and come back having rearranged the region." Nick glanced at the blood on John's coat, the fresh tear in the thigh, the bruise darkening Mercer's jaw, and the stack of recovered gunner contracts in their hands. Then he shut the ledger. "Vale?" John dropped the order sheet on the desk. Nick read the line, looked up, understood. "Good," he said. Hancock raised his glass slightly. "To educational nights." The first real arbitration came that afternoon. A Bunker Hill caravan master accused a Diamond City arms broker of falsifying escort weight to avoid contract obligations. The broker denied it. Voices rose. 2 guards reached for guns. Dogmeat growled before either hand touched a grip. The room went still. John listened, checked the route ledger, checked the cargo weight notes, spoke one sentence, settled it. Caps changed hands. No blood followed. Both men left irritated and alive. That was how order began. Not in the wars. In the compliance after. By the second week, the roads had changed enough to feel it. Not safe. Nothing in the Commonwealth deserved that word casually. But safer. Predictable in places they had not been. Protected by the fact that anyone breaking Continental roads now risked more than local retaliation. They risked becoming an example, and examples traveled. Settlements took notice. Traders adjusted. Mercenaries recalculated. The Brotherhood observed. The gunners, suddenly missing a commander and a corridor strategy, shrank back into their other priorities. The Institute watched all of it and did nothing visible. That was its own kind of threat, but not today's. Because today belonged to the tower. That evening, as the sun bled itself down through the shattered financial district, John stood on the upper balcony with dog meat beside him and the city spread below in hard lines and soft smoke. The wounded dog at the cabin had been moved that morning, carefully, slowly, and with a great deal of personal insult at the indignity, to a quiet upper suite far from traffic and politics. 2 dogs now, one from the storm, one from the road, both breathing, both alive. Nick came up behind him, hat in one hand. "Road count doubled today," the detective said. 3 settlements sent feelers. 1 caravan master from Quincy wants a standing route contract, and Hancock is trying to name a signature drink after you, which I advise stopping before it becomes permanent. John said no. Nick smiled faintly. "See, that's exactly why it'll stick." For a while they stood in silence, watching the Commonwealth move. At length Nick asked the question that had been waiting there for days. "So what happens now?" John looked down at the street where a caravan rolled safely beneath the tower. Guards relaxed enough to talk while they walked, which in the Commonwealth qualified as a cultural revolution. "Now," he said, "the rules hold. And if they don't?" John's eyes stayed on the road. "Then I do." Nick considered that, then nodded once as if some private equation had balanced. "You know," he said, "for a man who keeps insisting this isn't a kingdom, you've built something kings tend to envy." John answered, "Kings want obedience." Nick watched the caravan disappear into evening traffic. "And you?" John took a long moment before replying. "A place where people can cross without asking who owns the road." Nick put his hat back on. "That'll do." Below, the Continental glowed to life room by room under scavenged power and human insistence. Lobby lamps, reception desk, East Hall, upper watch posts. Not luxury, not restoration. Function. Purpose. A system. And that was the hard stop the Commonwealth had not expected. Not a dead tyrant. Not a new gang. Not a victory speech over bodies. A building. A desk. A road. Under rules. A man at the center of it who did not want a crown, a title, or permission. Just consequence. By nightfall, the story had already started hardening into something bigger than itself. Not just that John Wick had killed Marlowe. Not just that he had survived the gunners, faced down the Brotherhood, and buried a Deathclaw under the street. Those were events. The Commonwealth would retell them, embellish them, make them louder than truth. But underneath the legend, something simpler remained. He had made killers behave. And that changed everything. Long after the city quieted, after Hancock had finally gone back to good neighbor with 3 new ideas and 2 bad ones, after Nick had returned to his ledgers, after dog meat curled up by the desk and the wounded dog slept in its upper room, John stayed on the balcony watching the roads. He thought of Helen, of Daisy, of the first dog and the second, of the storm, of the cabin, of all the systems he had survived and all the ones he had broken. He had spent so much of his life as a man passing through structures built by others. Now, for the first time, he stood inside one built to mean exactly what he intended. Not mercy, not peace, not innocence. Something harder, and in this world, maybe more useful. A rule that remained after the gunfire. Below him, another caravan crossed cleanly through the district and vanished into the Commonwealth night. John watched until the last lantern light disappeared. Then he turned, went back inside, and let the doors of the Continental close behind him. They would open again in the morning. The roads would still be there. The rules would still hold. And if the Commonwealth came to test them again, John Wick would be waiting.